In the deepest recesses of history, where legend and truth intertwine, lies an ancient manuscript shrouded in the veil of mystery. Its yellowed pages are home to ancient secrets, and its name resonates in the whispers of time, the Kybalion. They say this book was forged in the stars and woven with the threads of ancestral knowledge. Guarded by the wise and sheltered in the shadows of history, its power transcends the limits of human understanding. Throughout the centuries, many have sought to unravel its enigmas, eager to discover the truth behind its encrypted words. But the Kybalion does not yield easily. It demands a price for its wisdom, a test of courage and determination that few are willing to face. In this auditory odyssey, I invite you to embark on a journey beyond time and space, where the boundaries between reality and fantasy blur. Join us on a tour through the dark corridors of hidden knowledge and the realms of mind and spirit. Prepare to immerse yourself in a sea of mystery and revelation, where each word whispered by the narrator's voice will take you closer to the very heart of Hermetic wisdom. But beware, bold traveler, for the path to enlightenment is fraught with dangers and temptations. Are you ready to challenge the Kybalion and uncover the secrets that await within its pages? Then onwards, for the journey is about to begin, and the truth awaits to be revealed. We are pleased to present to the attention of students and researchers of secret doctrines this small work based on ancient Hermetic teachings. So little has been written on this subject, despite countless references to the teachings in many occultism books, that the many diligent seekers of hidden truths will certainly welcome the publication of this volume with enthusiasm. The purpose of this work is not to proclaim a specific philosophy or doctrine, but rather to provide students with an exposition of truth that will help reconcile the many fragments of hidden knowledge they may have acquired, but which seem to apparently oppose each other, often discouraging or distracting the beginner in their studies. Our intention is not to erect a new temple of knowledge, but rather to place in the hands of the student a master key with which they may open the many inner doors of the temple of mystery, through which they have already entered by the main portals. No part of the occult teachings held by the world has been as carefully preserved as the fragments of Hermetic teachings that have come down to us through the centuries from the life of its great founder, Hermes Trismegistus, the scribe of the gods who received in ancient Egypt, at a time when the present race of men was still in its infancy, contemporaneous with Abraham, and if legends are true, an instructor of that venerable sage. Hermes was and remains the great central sun of occultism, whose rays have served to illuminate the countless teachings that have been promulgated since his time. All the fundamental and essential teachings contained in the esoteric teachings of each race can be traced back to Hermes. Even the oldest teachings of India undoubtedly have their roots in the original Hermetic teachings. From the land of the Ganges, many advanced occultists traveled to Egypt and sat at the feet of the master, from whom they obtained the master key that explained and reconciled their divergent views. Thus was firmly established the secret doctrine. Scholars from various lands also came, all regarding Hermes as the master of masters, and his influence was such that, despite the divergent paths taken by hundreds of instructors in these different lands, a certain similarity and underlying fundamental correspondence can still be found among the many often divergent theories held and taught by occultists of these various lands. Today, the student of comparative religions can discern the influence of Hermetic teachings in every religion worthy of the name, known to man, whether it be an extinct or vigorous religion in our time. There is always some correspondence despite contradictory features, and Hermetic teachings act as the great reconciler. The lifelong work of Hermes seems to have been to sow the great seed of truth, which has sprouted and blossomed into strange sacred forms, rather than to establish a school of philosophy that would dominate world thought. Nevertheless, the original truths taught by him have been preserved intact in their original purity by a few men in every age, withholding from many half-developed students and followers, following the Hermetic custom and reserving their truth for the few ready to understand and master it. From mouth to ear, the truth has been transmitted among the few. Throughout history, there have always been a select few initiates scattered across different corners of the globe, safeguarding the sacred flame of Hermetic wisdom. These dedicated souls have been ever ready to offer their light, to reignite the dimming lamps of the outside world whenever the truth grows faint and obscured by neglect. In times when the wicks become clogged with foreign matter, there have always been those faithfully tending to the altar of truth, upon which shines the eternal lamp of wisdom. These individuals have dedicated their lives to the labor of love, as the poet eloquently expressed, "Or let not the flame die out, guarded age after age in its dark cave, carefully maintained in its holy temples, nourished by pure priests of love. Do not let the flame die out." They have never sought the approval of the masses or a multitude of followers, for they understand the rarity of those prepared for truth or capable of recognizing it when presented. They reserve the deeper truths for the discerning few, while others provide simpler teachings for the less mature. Despite their seclusion, these guardians of wisdom remain faithful to the original teachings of Hermes, imparting words of truth to those ready to receive them. As the Kybalion states, "Where the footsteps of the master fall, the ears of those ready for his teaching open wide, and when the student's ears are ready to hear, the lips come to fill them with wisdom. Yet they adhere strictly to the Hermetic aphorism, 'The lips of wisdom are closed except to the ears of understanding.' Some may criticize their policy of seclusion and reticence, but history attests to the wisdom of their approach. The Hermetists understand the folly of attempting to teach truths to those unprepared or unwilling to receive them. They have no desire to be martyrs, and instead observe with a compassionate smile while the world clamors loudly around them, often misunderstanding and perverting the truths they hold dear. Even today the spirit of persecution persists, with certain Hermetic teachings facing ridicule and contempt if proclaimed publicly. Yet, despite these challenges, this work endeavors to convey the fundamental teachings of the Kybalion, empowering true students to grasp and apply these principles for themselves. For those who are sincere seekers, these teachings will serve as a guiding light on their journey of understanding. For others, they will remain mere words, devoid of meaning until they are ready to embark on the path of wisdom. Signed, the Three Initiates. Chapter 1. The Hermetic Philosophy. The lips of wisdom are closed except to the ears of understanding. The Kybalion. From ancient Egypt came the fundamental esoteric and occult teachings that have so greatly influenced the philosophies of all races, nations, and peoples for several thousand years. Egypt, the home of the pyramids and the Sphinx, was the birthplace of hidden wisdom and mystical teachings. All nations borrowed from its secret doctrine: India, Persia, Chaldea, Media, China, Japan, Assyria, Greece, and ancient Rome, as well as other ancient countries, participated widely in the feast of knowledge that the hierophants and masters of the land of Isis offered so generously to those who came prepared to partake in the great reservoir of mystical and occult knowledge that the minds of this land had gathered. In ancient Egypt resided the great adepts and masters who have never been surpassed and rarely equaled since the time of the great Hermes. In Egypt was the great lodge of lodges of the mystics. At the gates of their temples entered the neophytes, who later, as hierophants, adepts, and masters, traveled to the four corners of the earth, carrying with them the precious knowledge to transmit it to those who were ready, willing, and eager to receive it. All students of the occult recognize the debt they owe to these venerable masters of this ancient land. But among these great masters of ancient Egypt, once lived one whom the masters hailed as the Master of Masters. This man, if indeed he was a man, resided in Egypt in the very earliest days. He was known as Hermes Trismegistus. He was the father of occult wisdom, the founder of astrology, the discoverer of alchemy. The details of his history are lost to history due to the passage of years. Although several ancient countries have disputed the honor of claiming the place of his birth thousands of years ago, the date of his residence in Egypt during his last incarnation on this planet is not known today. However, it was fixed to the earliest days of the oldest dynasties of Egypt, long before the temples of Moses. The best authorities consider him contemporary with Abraham, and some Jewish traditions even assert that Abraham acquired some of his mystical knowledge directly from Hermes himself. According to the years following his departure from this plane of life, Tradition states that he lived 300 years in the flesh. The Egyptians erected monuments to Hermes and elevated him to the rank of god under the name Thoth. Hundreds of years later, the people of ancient Greece also honored him among their many gods, calling him Hermes, the god of wisdom. The Egyptians perpetuated his memory for many centuries, even millennia, naming him the scribe of the gods and conferring upon him the honorary title of Trismegistus, meaning the triple great, the great-great, the greatest, and so on. In all ancient countries, the name of Hermes Trismegistus was venerated as synonymous with the source of wisdom. Even to this day, we use the term hermetic in the sense of sealed secret, so that nothing can escape, etc. This is because Hermes's disciples have always observed the principle of secrecy in their teachings. They did not believe in casting pearls before swine, but preferred to follow the teaching, milk for babes, meat for strong men. Maxims familiar to readers of Christian scriptures, but also used by the Egyptians for centuries before the Christian era. This policy of cautious dissemination of truth has always characterized Hermetic teachings, even to this day. Hermetic teachings are found in all countries, among all religions, but never identified with a particular country or religious sect, due to the warning of the ancient instructors against allowing the secret doctrine to become crystallized into a creed. The wisdom of this warning is evident to all students of the history of ancient occultism in India and Persia, which was greatly lost because the instructors became priests, and thus mingled theology with philosophy, leading to the gradual loss of Indian and Persian occultism among the mass of religious superstitions, cults, beliefs, and gods. The same was true for ancient Greece and Rome, as well as for the Hermetic teachings of the Gnostics and early Christians, which were lost in the time of Constantine, whose iron hand stifled philosophy under the cover of theology, thereby losing for the Christian Church what was its own essence and spirit. This led it to wander blindly for several centuries before finding its way back to its ancestral faith. It is evident to all attentive observers in this 20th century that the Church is now seeking to return to its ancient mystical teachings, but there have always been a few faithful souls who have kept the flame alive, carefully guarding it and not allowing its light to be extinguished. Thanks to these loyal hearts and courageous spirits, we still have the truth with us, but it is not found in books in great quantity. It has been passed from master to pupil, from initiate to hierophant, from mouth to ear. When it was written, its meaning was veiled in terms of alchemy and astrology, so that only those who possessed the key could read it correctly. This was necessary to avoid the persecutions of the theologians of the Middle Ages, who fought the secret doctrine with fire and sword, stake and cross. Even nowadays, one will find only a few trustworthy books on Hermetic philosophy. Though countless in number, the early Hermetic teachings were passed from master to student, compiled into what was called the Kybalion. Over many centuries, the exact meaning and importance of this term were lost. Nonetheless, this teaching is known by many, transmitted orally through the centuries. Its precepts were never written or printed, at least as far as we know. It was simply a collection of maxims, axioms, and precepts that were incomprehensible to outsiders, but easily understood by students, once the axioms, maxims, and precepts had been explained and exemplified by Hermetic initiates to their novices. These teachings actually constituted the fundamental principles of the Hermetic art of alchemy, which, contrary to general belief, dealt with the control of mental forces rather than material elements. It was about the transmutation of one class of mental vibrations into another, rather than the changing of one class of metal into another. The legends of the philosopher's stone transforming base metal into gold were an allegory related to Hermetic philosophy, quickly understood by all students of true Hermeticism. In this little book, the first lesson, we invite our students to examine the Hermetic teachings as presented in the Kybalion and as explained by ourselves, humble students of the teachings who, although bearing the title of initiates, remain students themselves. Here are many maxims, axioms, and precepts from the Kybalion, accompanied by explanations and illustrations that we deem suitable to make the teachings more easily understandable for the modern student. especially as the original text is intentionally veiled in obscure terms. The original maxims, axioms, and precepts of the Kybalion are printed here in brackets with appropriate credit. Our own work is printed regularly within the body of the work. We hope that the many students to whom we now offer this little book will derive as much benefit from the study of its pages as those who have gone before, traversing the same path to mastery through the centuries following the times of Hermes Trismegistus, the master of masters, the great, in the words of the Kybalion. Where the footsteps of the master fall, the ears of those prepared for his teaching open wide. When the ears of the student are ready to hear, then come the lips to fill them with wisdom. Thus, according to the teachings, to pass on this book to those ready for instruction will attract the attention of those prepared to receive the teaching. Similarly, when the student is ready to receive the truth, this little book will come to him or her. Such is the Hermetic principle of cause and effect in its aspect of the law of attraction, bringing lips and ears, student and book together. So it is. Establishing the mental nature of the universe, it easily explains all the varied mental and psychic phenomena that capture such a large share of public attention, and that without such explanation remain incomprehensible and defy scientific treatment. Understanding this great Hermetic principle of mentalism allows the individual to easily grasp the subtleties of the mental universe and apply them to their well-being and advancement. The Hermetic student is able to intelligently apply the great mental laws instead of using them haphazardly. With this master key in their possession, the student can open the many doors of the mental and psychic temple of knowledge and enter them freely and intelligently. This principle explains the true nature of energy, power, matter, and why and how they are all subordinate to the mastery of the mind. One of the ancient Hermetic masters wrote long ago, "He who grasps the truth of the mental nature of the universe is well advanced on the path of mastery," and these words are as true today as they were when they were first written. Without this master key, mastery is impossible, and the student calls in vain to the many doors of the temple. The principle of correspondence, as above, so below, as below, so above. This principle incorporates the truth that there is always a correspondence between the laws and phenomena of the various planes of existence and life. The ancient Hermetists expressed this axiom in these terms: as above, so below, as below, so above. Understanding this principle provides a means to resolve many obscure enigmas and hidden secrets of nature. There are planes beyond our knowing, but when we apply to them the principle of correspondence, we are able to understand many things that would otherwise have been unknown to us. This principle is of universal application and manifestation in the various planes of the material, mental, and spiritual universe. The ancient Hermetists regarded this principle as one of the most important mental tools, allowing man to look beyond the obstacles that hide the unknown from life. Its use even enabled one to pierce the veil of Isis, to the point of being able to catch a glimpse of the goddess's face, just as the knowledge of the principles of geometry allows man to measure distant suns and their movements from his observatory. Thus, a knowledge of the principle of correspondence enables man to reason intelligently from the known to the unknown. Studying the monad, he understands the archangel. The principle of vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. This principle incorporates the truth that everything is in motion, everything vibrates, nothing is at rest. This Hermetic principle, stated thousands of years ago by the masters of ancient Egypt, explains that the differences between the various manifestations of matter, energy, mind, and even spirituality primarily result from varying frequencies of vibration. From the all, which is pure spirit, to the grossest form of matter, everything is in vibration. The higher the vibration, the higher the position on the scale. The vibration of the spirit is a degree of infinite intensity and rapidity, so much so that it is practically at rest, just as a rapidly rotating wheel seems motionless. And at the other end of the scale, there are gross forms of matter whose vibrations are so low that they appear to be at rest. Between these two poles there are millions and millions of varying degrees of vibration, from the corpuscle and the electron, the atom and the molecule, to worlds and universes. Everything is in vibratory motion. This is also true in the realms of energy and force, which are just varying degrees of vibration, and also in the mental planes, whose states depend on vibrations, and even in the spiritual planes. Understanding this principle with the appropriate formulas allows Hermetic students to control their own mental vibrations as well as those of others. The masters also apply this principle to the conquest of natural phenomena in various ways. One who understands the principle of vibration has grasped the scepter of power, says one of the ancient writers. The principle of polarity. Everything is dual, everything has poles, everything has its pair of opposites alike, and similar are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths, all paradoxes can be reconciled. This principle incorporates the truth that everything is dual, everything has two poles, everything has its pair of opposites, all being ancient Hermetic axioms. It explains the ancient paradoxes that have puzzled so many people and manifests thus. Thesis and antithesis are identical in nature but different in degree. Opposites are the same thing but different only in degree. Pairs of opposites can be reconciled, extremes meet. Everything is and is not at the same time. All truths are but half-truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything, etc. It explains that in everything there are two poles or opposite aspects, and that the opposites are actually just the two ends of the same thing, with many varying degrees between them. To illustrate this, heat and cold, although opposites, are actually the same thing, with the difference simply being degrees of the same thing. Look at your thermometer and see if you can discern where heat ends and cold begins. There is no such thing as absolute heat or absolute cold. Both terms, heat and cold, simply indicate varying degrees of the same thing, and that same thing that manifests as heat and cold is simply a form, a variety, and a frequency of vibration. So heat and cold are simply the two poles of what we call heat, and the phenomena accompanying them are thus manifestations of the principle of polarity. The same principle manifests in the case of light and darkness, which are the same thing, with the difference lying in the varying degrees between the two poles of the phenomenon. Where does darkness end and light begin? What is the difference between large and small, hard and soft, black and white, sharp and blunt, loud and quiet, high and low, positive and negative? The principle of polarity explains these paradoxes, and no principle can replace it. The same principle operates on the mental plane. Let's take a radical and extreme example, that of love and hate, two mental states that are totally different in appearance, yet there are degrees of hate and degrees of love, and a midpoint where we use the terms likes and dislikes that overlap so gradually that sometimes we cannot tell whether we love or hate, or neither. And all are just degrees of the same thing, as you will see if you just take a moment to think about it. And more importantly for the Hermeticists, it is possible to change the vibrations of hate into vibrations of love in one's own mind and in the minds of others. Many of you reading these lines have had personal experiences of the rapid, involuntary transition from love to hate and vice versa, in your own case and that of others. Therefore, you will realize the possibility of this being accomplished through the use of will through Hermetic formulas. Good and evil are just the poles of the same thing. And the Hermetist understands the art of transmuting evil into good through the application of the principle of polarity. In short, the art of polarization becomes a phase of Hermetic mental alchemy, known and practiced by ancient and modern Hermetic masters. An understanding of this principle will enable you to change your own polarity, as well as that of others, if you are willing to devote the time and study necessary to master this art. The principle of rhythm. Everything moves outward and inward. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The oscillation of the pendulum is manifested everywhere. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. This principle incorporates the truth that everything manifests a measured movement from side to side, a ebb and flow, a back and forth, a rise and fall, like a high tide and a low tide between the two poles that exist according to the principle of polarity described a moment ago. There is always action and reaction, advancement and retreat, ascent and descent. So it is in the affairs of the universe, of suns, of worlds, of men, of animals, of mind, of energy, and of matter. This law manifests in the creation and destruction of worlds, in the rise and fall of nations, in the life of all things, and finally, in the mental states of man. The Hermeticists have grasped this principle, finding its universal application, and have also discovered certain ways to overcome its effects in themselves through the use of appropriate formulas and methods. They apply the material law of neutralization. They cannot cancel the principle or stop its operation, but they have learned how to escape its effects on themselves to some degree, depending on their mastery of the principle. They have learned to use it instead of being used by it. It is in this and in other similar methods that the art of the Hermeticists lies. The master of Hermetic teachings polarizes to the point where he wishes to rest, and then neutralizes the rhythmic oscillation of the pendulum that would tend to lead him to the other pole. All individuals who have attained a certain degree of self-mastery do this, more or less unconsciously. But the master does it consciously, by the use of his will, and achieves a degree of mental balance and firmness almost incredible to the masses, who are swayed back and forth like a pendulum. This principle and that of polarity have been closely studied by Hermeticists, and the methods to counteract, neutralize, and use them form an important part of Hermetic mental alchemy. The principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect, every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for unrecognized law. There are many planes of causality, but nothing escapes the law. This principle incorporates the fact that there is a cause for every effect, an effect for every cause. It explains that everything happens according to law, that nothing ever happens simply, that there is no such thing as chance. There are various planes of cause and effect dominating the higher and lower planes, but nevertheless, nothing entirely escapes the law. Hermeticists understand the art and methods to rise above the ordinary plane of cause and effect to some degree, and by mentally rising to a higher level, they become causes rather than effects. The masses of people are docilely driven by their environment, their needs, and the desires of those stronger than themselves by heredity, suggestion, and other external causes, moving them like pawns on the chessboard of life. But the masters, by rising to the higher plane, dominate their moods, characters, qualities, and powers, as well as the environment around them, and become players in the game of life instead of being played and moved back and forth by the wills of others and the environment. They use the principle instead of being its instruments. The masters obey the causality of the higher planes, but aid it to rule over their own plane. In this statement is condensed a treasure of Hermetic knowledge. Let him who can read it. The principle of gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. This principle incorporates the truth that there is a gender manifested in everything. The masculine and feminine principles are always in action. This is true not only on the physical plane, but also on mental and even spiritual planes. On the physical plane, the principle manifests as sex. On the higher planes, it takes subtler forms, but the principle remains the same. No physical, mental, or spiritual creation is possible without this principle. An understanding of its laws will illuminate many subjects that have perplexed the minds of men. The principle of gender always works in the direction of generation and creation. Everything and every person contains the two elements or principles, or this great principle within them. Every male also contains the female element. Every female also contains the male principle. If you wish to understand the philosophy of mental and spiritual creation, generation and regeneration, you must understand and study this Hermetic principle. It contains the solution to many mysteries of life. We caution you that this principle has no reference to the many low, pernicious, and degrading theories, teachings, and practices taught under fancy titles, and which are a perversion of the great natural principle of gender. These low levels of ancient times and these infamous forms of ease tend to ruin the mind, body, and soul. And Hermetic philosophy has always sounded a note of warning against these degraded teachings, which lead to lust, license, and perversion of the principles of nature. If you seek such teachings, you must go elsewhere to find them. Hermeticism has nothing for you. Through these lines, for the pure everything is pure, for the low everything is low. Chapter 3. Mental transmutation. Mentality, just like metals and elements, can be transmuted from state to state, from degree to degree, from condition to condition, from one pole to another, from one vibration to another. True hermetic transmutation is a mental art, as we have established. The Hermeticists were the original alchemists, astrologers and psychologists, with Hermes being the founder of these schools of thought. From astrology grew modern astronomy, from alchemy came modern chemistry, and from mystical psychology arose the modern psychology of the schools. However, it should not be assumed that the ancients were ignorant of what modern schools suppose to be their exclusive and special property. The records engraved in the stones of ancient Egypt clearly show that the ancients possessed a complete and exhaustive knowledge of astronomy, as evidenced by the construction of the pyramids and their connection to the study of astronomical science. They were also not ignorant of chemistry, as fragments of ancient writings show that they were familiar with the chemical properties of things. In fact, ancient theories regarding physics are slowly being verified by the latest discoveries of modern science, mainly those concerning the constitution of matter. Nor should it be assumed that they were ignorant of supposedly modern discoveries in psychology. On the contrary, the Egyptians were particularly well versed in the science of psychology, especially in branches ignored by modern schools, yet unearthed under the name of psychic science, which puzzles today's psychologists and makes them reluctant to admit that there might be something to it. After all, the truth is that beneath material chemistry, astronomy, and psychology, there lies psychology in its phase of cerebral action. The ancients possessed a knowledge of transcendent astronomy called astrology, of transcendent chemistry called alchemy, and of transcendent psychology called mystical psychology. They possessed both internal and external knowledge, whereas modern scientists possess only the latter. Among the many secret branches of knowledge possessed by the Hermeticists was one known as mental transmutation, which forms the subject matter of this lesson. Transmutation is a term commonly used to denote the ancient art of transmuting metals, especially base metals, into gold. The word transmute means to change from one nature, form, or substance to another, to transform. Consequently, mental transmutation means the art of changing and transforming mental states, forms, and conditions into others. Thus, you can see that mental transmutation is the art of mental chemistry, if you prefer that term, a form of practical mystical psychology. But it means much more than what it seems on the surface. Mental transmutation, alchemy, or chemistry on the mental plane are quite significant in their effects, and if the art stopped there, it would be one of the most important branches of study known to man. But this is only the beginning. Let's see why. The first of the 7 Hermetic Principles is the principle of mentalism, whose action is all is mind, the universe is mental, meaning that the underlying reality of the universe is mental, and that the universe itself is mental, existing in the mind of the all. We will address this principle in later lessons, but let's consider the effect of the principle if it were assumed to be true. If the universe is mental in its nature, then mental transmutation must be the art of changing the conditions of the universe along the lines of matter, force, and mind. You understand, therefore, that mental transmutation is truly the magic about which the ancient writers had so much to say in their mystical works, and upon which they gave so little practical instruction. If all is mind, then the art that enables the transmutation of mental conditions must make the master the controller of material conditions, as well as conditions usually called mental. In fact, no one, except advanced mental alchemists, has been able to reach the degree of power necessary to control the grossest physical conditions, such as controlling the elements of nature, producing or stopping storms, producing and stopping earthquakes, and other great physical phenomena. But that such men have existed and exist today is a matter of sincere belief for all advanced occultists of all schools who assert that masters exist and possess these powers. The best instructors assure them to their students, having had experiences that justify such beliefs and assertions. These masters do not make public demonstrations of their powers, but seek seclusion away from the crowds to better work on their path to realization. We mention their existence at this stage only to draw your attention to the fact that their power is entirely mental and operates along the lines of higher mental transmutation under the Hermetic principle of mentalism. The universe is mental, the Kybalion, but students and hermeticists of lesser degree than the masters, initiates, and instructors are able to work freely along the mental plane in mental transmutation. In fact, all that we call psychic phenomena, mental influence, mental science, new thought phenomena, etc., operate along the same general lines, for there is only one principle involved. No matter by what name the phenomena may be called, the student and practitioner of mental transmutation work on the mental plane to transmute mental conditions, states, etc., into others, according to various more or less effective formulas. The various treatments, affirmations, denials, etc., of mental science schools are nothing but often quite imperfect and unscientific formulas of the Hermetic art. Most modern practitioners are quite ignorant compared to the ancient masters because they lack the fundamental knowledge upon which the work is based. Not only are one's own mental states, etc., changed or transmuted by Hermetic methods, but also the states of others can and are constantly transmuted in the same way, usually unconsciously but often consciously, by some who understand the laws and principles, in cases where the affected persons are not informed of the principles of self-protection. And much more than that, as many students and practitioners of modern mental science know, any material condition dependent upon the minds of others can be changed or transmuted according to the sincere desire, will, and treatments of the person desiring already changed conditions. The public is so informed of these things currently that we do not deem it necessary to mention them at length, our purpose at this stage being simply to show the underlying Hermetic principle and art behind all these different forms of practice, good and bad. For force can be used in opposite directions according to the Hermetic principles of polarity. In this small book, we will establish the fundamental principles of mental transmutation so that all who read it may grasp the underlying principles and thus possess the master key that will open the many doors of the principle of polarity. We will proceed to a consideration of the first of the 7 Hermetic Principles, the principle of mentalism, in which is explained the truth that everything is mental, the universe is mental, in the words of the Kybalion. We ask for close attention and careful study of this great principle from our students, as it is truly the fundamental principle of all Hermetic philosophy and the Hermetic art of mental transmutation. Chapter 4. Beneath and behind the universe of time, space, and change, there must always be found the substantial reality, the fundamental truth. Substance means that which underlies all external manifestations, the essence, the essential reality, the thing in itself, etc. Substantial means to exist truly, to be the essential element, to be real, etc. Reality means the state of being real, true, lasting, valid, fixed, permanent, effective, etc. Beneath and behind all appearances or external manifestations, there must always be found a substantial reality. This is the law. Man, considering the universe of which he is a part, sees only change in matter, forces, and mental states. He sees that nothing is truly real, but that everything is becoming and changing. Nothing remains still. Everything is born, grows, dies. As soon as something reaches its peak, it begins to decline. The law of rhythm is in constant operation. There is no reality, lasting quality, fixedness, or substantiality in anything. Nothing is permanent except change. He sees all things evolve from other things and dissolve into other things, a constant action and reaction, ebb and flow, construction and deconstruction, creation and destruction, birth, growth, decline, and death. Nothing lasts except change. And if it is a man who thinks, he will realize that all these changing things can only be the external appearances or manifestations of some underlying power, of some substantial reality. All thinkers of all lands and all times have supposed the necessity of postulating the existence of this substantial reality. All philosophies worthy of the name have been based on this idea. Men have given it many names. Some have called it by the term divinity under many titles. Others have called it the infinite and eternal energy. Others have attempted to call it matter, but all have recognized its existence. It is self-evident. It needs no argument. In these lessons, we have followed the example of some of the greatest thinkers of the world, both ancient and modern, the Hermetic masters, and we have called this underlying power, this substantial reality, by the Hermetic term, the all-completed, which we consider the most comprehensive among the many terms applied by man to that which transcends names and terms. We accept and teach the viewpoint of the great Hermetic thinkers of all time, as well as that of those illumined souls who have reached higher planes of being, both asserting that the inner nature of the All is unknowable. It is so because nothing but the All itself can understand its own nature and being. The Hermeticists believe and teach that the All in itself is and must always remain unknowable. They do not regard all the theories, conjectures, and speculations of theologians and metaphysicians concerning the inner nature of the All as anything other than puerile efforts of the human mind to grasp the infinite secret. Such efforts have always failed and will always fail because of the very nature of the task. He who pursues such researches wanders spinning in the labyrinth of thought until he is lost to all sound, reasoning, action, or behavior, totally unfit for the work of life. He is like the squirrel who frantically runs around the wheel of his cage mill, always moving and yet getting nowhere in the end, always a prisoner and finding himself exactly where he started. And even more presumptuous are those who attempt to attribute to the all the personality, qualities, properties, characteristics, and attributes of themselves, attributing to the all human emotions, feelings, and human characteristics, even to the most petty qualities of humanity, such as jealousy, susceptibility to flattery and praise, the desire for offerings and worship, and all the other remnants of the childhood days of the race. Such ideas are not worthy of adult men and women and are quickly abandoned. At this stage, it may be appropriate to clarify that we make a distinction between religion and theology, between philosophy and metaphysics. Religion for us means that intuitive realization of the existence of the All and the individual's relationship to it, while theology represents men's attempts to attribute to the All a personality, qualities, characteristics, their theories about its will, desires, plans, and purpose, and their claim to act as mediators between the All and the people. Philosophy for us means the search for knowledge of things knowable and thinkable, while metaphysics represents the attempt to push research beyond the limits into unknowable and unthinkable regions in a direction similar to that of theology, and therefore both religion and philosophy represent for us things rooted in reality, while theology and metaphysics seem to be broken, reeds rooted in the shifting sands of ignorance, providing nothing but the most uncertain support for man's mind or soul. We do not expect our students to accept these viewpoints. We mention them simply to show our position. Be that as it may, you will hear very little about theology and metaphysics in these lessons. However, while the essential nature of the All is unknowable, there are certain truths related to its existence that the human mind finds itself compelled to accept, and the examination of these decrees forms a proper subject of inquiry, particularly because they coincide with the decrees of the illumined on higher planes. And to this research, we now invite you, which is the fundamental truth, the substantial reality, is beyond any true denomination. The wise call it the All in its essence. The All is unknowable, but the verdict of reason can be welcomed and treated with respect. The Kybalion. Human reason, whose judgments we must accept as we reflect, thus informs us about the All without seeking to lift the veil of the unknowable. 1. The All must be all that it is really. There can be nothing outside the All, otherwise the All would not be the All. 2. The All must be infinite. For there is nothing to define, confine, bind, limit, or restrict it. The All must be infinite in time or eternal. It must have always existed, continuously, for nothing else would ever have created it, and something can never arise from nothing. And if it had ever begun, even for an instant, it would not be now. It must exist eternally, for nothing can destroy it, and it can never not be, even for an instant, for something can never become nothing. It must be infinite in space. It must be everywhere, for there is no place outside the all. It can only be continuous in space, without break, sensation, separation, or interruption. For nothing can break, separate, or interrupt its continuity, and nothing to fill the voids. It must be infinite in power or absolute, for nothing can limit, restrict, constrain, confine, or disturb it. It is subject to no other power, for there is no other power. 3. The all must be immutable or not subject to change in its real nature, for nothing can effect changes upon it, nothing upon which it could change or from which it could be changed. It can neither be added to nor subtracted from, increased nor diminished, nor become greater or smaller in any aspect. It must always have been and remain exactly what it is now. The all has never been, is not now, and never will be a thing that could change. Being infinite, absolute, eternal, immutable, it follows that anything finite, changing, ephemeral, and conditioned cannot be the all. And since there is nothing outside the all in reality, then all these finite things must be as nothing in reality. Now do not be alarmed. We are not trying to lead you into the domain of Christian science under the guise of Hermetic philosophy. There is a reconciliation of this seemingly contradictory state of affairs. Be patient, we will get there in time. We see around us what is called matter, which forms the physical foundation for all forms. This is only matter, not the all. Matter cannot manifest life or spirit, and since life and spirit are manifested in the universe, the all cannot be matter. For nothing rises higher than its own origin, nothing ever manifests in an effect that is not in the cause, nothing develops as a consequence without being involved as a precedent. Furthermore, modern science informs us that there is actually no matter, that what we call matter is simply interrupted energy or force. This is energy or force at a low frequency of vibration. As a recent writer put it, matter has dissolved into mystery. Even material science has abandoned the theory of matter and now rests on the basis of energy. So the all is only pure energy or force, not energy and force as materialists use these terms. For their energy and force are blind, mechanical things, devoid of life or spirit. Life and spirit can never arise from blind energy or force for the reason given earlier. Nothing can rise higher than its origin. Nothing develops unless it is involved. Nothing manifests in the effect if it is not in the cause. Thus, the all can only be energy or force. However, if that were so, then there would be no such things as life and spirit, non-existent, and we know that this is not the case, for we are alive and use our minds to consider this same question, and those who claim that everything is energy or force do the same. So, what is there above matter or energy that we know to exist in the universe? Life and spirit, in all their varying degrees of development. So you may be asking, do you mean that the all is life and spirit? Yes and no is our answer. If by life and spirit you mean what we, poor insignificant mortals, mean by these words, we say no, it is not that. But what kind of life and spirit do you mean, you ask? The answer is a living mental life, so much superior to what mortals understand by these words, as life and spirit are superior to mechanical forces or matter. An infinite mental life, in comparison to infinite life and spirit, we mean what enlightened souls mean when they reverently utter the word spirit. The all is an infinite mental life. Chapter 5. The Mental Universe. The universe is mental, held in the mind of the all. The all is spirit. But what is spirit? This question cannot be answered by reason, for its definition is practically that of the all, which cannot be explained or defined. Spirit is simply a name given by men to the highest conception of infinite mental life. It represents the truly living essence, far above life and spirit as we know them, just as these are superior to mechanical energy and matter. Spirit transcends our understanding, and we use this term simply to think or speak of the all for purposes of reflection and understanding. We are justified in considering spirit as infinite mental life, while simultaneously recognizing that we cannot fully comprehend it. We must either do that or stop thinking about this question altogether. Let us now proceed to a consideration of the nature of the universe as a whole and in its parts. What is the universe? We have seen that there can be nothing outside the all. So, the universe is neither the all. For the universe seems to be made up of many things and is constantly evolving, which does not fit with the idea we are constrained to accept concerning the all, as established in our last lesson. So, if the universe is neither the all nor nothing, such is the inevitable conclusion of the mind upon the first thought. But that does not answer the question, for we are convinced of the existence of the universe. So, if the universe is neither the all nor created by the all, having divided itself into fragments, what else can it be? That is the great question. Let us examine it closely. We find here that the principle of correspondence comes to our aid. The old Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, can be brought into play at this stage. Let us try to gain an insight into the workings of the higher planes by examining those of our own plane of existence. The principle of correspondence must apply here too, as to other problems. Let us look at how man creates on his own plane of existence. Well, first, he can create by making something out of external materials. But that will not work, for there are no materials outside the all with which he can create. Next, man propagates or reproduces his own species through the process of generation, which is a self-multiplication accomplished by transferring a part of his substance to his offspring. But that is not enough either, for the all cannot transfer or subtract a part of itself, nor can it reproduce or multiply. From the start, there would be a separation, and in the second case, an addition or multiplication to the all, both of which are absurd ideas. There is no third way for man to create except mentally, and in doing so, he uses no external material, nor does he reproduce himself. Yet his mind penetrates mental creation. Following the principle of correspondence, we are justified in considering that the all creates the universe mentally, in a manner similar to the process by which man creates mental images. Here the judgment of reason concurs with that of the enlightened, as shown by their teachings and writings. Such are the teachings of the wise, such has been the teaching of Hermes. The all cannot create in any other way, except mentally, without using material, and there is none to use, nor by reproducing itself, which is also impossible. There is no escape from this conclusion of reason, which, as we have said, coincides with the highest teachings of the enlightened. Just as you, student, can create your own universe in your mind, similarly, the all creates universes in its own mind. But your universe is the mental creation of a finite mind, while that of the all is the creation of an infinite mind. Both are similar in nature, but infinitely different in degree. We will examine the process of creation and manifestation more closely as we progress. But this is the point to anchor in your minds at this stage. The universe and everything it contains is a mental creation of the all. Surely indeed, all is spirit. The all creates in its infinite mind countless universes, which have existed for eons, and yet for the all, the creation, development, decline, and death of 1,000,000 universes are like the blink of an eye. The infinite mind of the all is the crucible of universes. The principle of gender, see Chapter 1 and others to follow, is manifested on all planes of material, mental, and spiritual life. But as we have said before, gender does not mean sex. Sex is simply a material manifestation of gender. Gender means relating to generation or creation, and wherever something is generated or created on any plane, the principle of gender must be manifested, and it is true even in the creation of universes. Now do not jump to the conclusion that we are teaching that there is a male and female God or creator. This idea is simply a distortion of the ancient teachings on the subject. The true teaching is that the all itself is above gender, as it is above all other laws, including those of time and space. It is the law from which laws proceed and is not subject to them. But when the all manifests on the plane of generation or creation, then it acts in accordance with law and principle, for it evolves on a lower plane of existence and thus manifests the principle of gender in its masculine and feminine aspects. On the mental plane, This idea may seem alarming to some of you hearing it for the first time, but you have all truly accepted it passively in your conceptions. Every day, you speak of the fatherhood of God and the motherhood of nature, of God the Father and nature the universal mother. And thus you have instinctively recognized the principle of gender in the universe, have you not? But Hermetic teaching does not imply real duality. The all is one. The two aspects are only aspects of manifestation. The teaching is that the masculine principle, manifested by the all, is in some way distinct from the actual mental creation of the universe. It projects its will towards the feminine principle, which can be called nature, and there the true work of the evolution of the universe begins, from simple centers of activity to man and then ever higher, all within well-established and firmly binding natural laws. If you prefer the old thought figures, you can think of the masculine principle as God the Father and the feminine principle as nature, the universal mother, from which all things have been generated. This is more than just a poetic figure of speech. It is an idea of the actual process of the creation of the universe. But never forget that the all is one, and in its infinite mind the universe is generated, created, and exists. This can help you to get the right idea if you apply the principle of correspondence to yourself and your own mind. You know that the part of you called I is somehow apart and witnesses the creation of mental images in your own mind. The part of your mind where mental generation takes place can be called the me, in distinction from the I, which is separate and present, examines the thoughts, ideas, and images of the me, as above, so below. Remember that phenomena on one plane can be used to solve the puzzles of higher or lower planes. It is strange that you, the children, feel this instinctive reverence for the all, this feeling we call religion, this respect and reverence for the Father-Mother. It is strange that when you contemplate the works and wonders of nature, you are overwhelmed by a powerful sensation that finds its roots deep within your being. It is the universal mother to whom you cling as a baby clings to the breast. Do not make the mistake of assuming that the small world you see around you, the earth, which is but a mere speck of dust in the universe, is the universe itself. There are millions of such worlds and larger ones, and there are millions upon millions of such universes in the infinite mind of the all. Even within our small solar system, there are regions and planes of life much higher than ours, and beings compared to whom we, mortal bound to earth, are like life forms that dwell on the ocean floor, compared to man. There are beings with powers and attributes greater than man has ever dreamed of possessing, even gods, and yet these beings were once like you, or even lower, and you will be like them, or even higher with time. For such is the destiny of man as described by the enlightened, and death is not real even in a relative sense. It is only a birth to a new life. You will advance to higher and greater planes of life for eons and eons of time. The universe is your home, and you will explore its farthest corners before the end of time. You dwell in the infinite mind of the all, and your possibilities and opportunities are infinite, both in time and space. At the end of the great cycle of eons, when the all draws all its creations back to itself again, you will then be able to know all truth by being one with the all. Such is the judgment of the enlightened, those who have advanced far along the path. Meanwhile, rest quietly and serenely. You are safe and protected by the infinite power of the Father-Mother. Mortal children are at home in the Father-Mother. There is none without father or mother in the universe. The Kybalion, Chapter 6, The Divine Paradox. The average wise, recognizing the relative unreality of the universe, think they can defy its laws. Those are foolish, vain, and presumptuous, and they dash themselves against the rocks and are shattered by the elements due to their folly. The true sages, understanding the nature of the universe, use the law against the laws, the superior against the inferior, and through the art of alchemy, transmute what is undesirable into what is precious and thus triumph. Mastery does not lie in abnormal dreams, visions, and imaginings, or fantastic experiences, but in the use of higher forces against lower ones, escaping the sufferings of lower planes by vibrating on higher planes. Transmutation, not presumptuous denial, is the weapon of the master. This is the paradox of the universe resulting from the principle of polarity that manifests when the all begins to create. Be attentive to this, as it indicates the difference between average wisdom and true wisdom. While for the infinite all, the universe, its laws, powers, life and phenomena are like things observed in a state of meditation or dream. For all that is finite, the universe must be treated as real, and life, action and thought must accordingly proceed. Even with an ever-present understanding of the higher truth, everyone, according to their own plan and laws outside the all, imagines the universe to be truly real. Then woe to the universe, for there would then be no escape from low to high towards the divine. The universe would become stagnant, and progress would become impossible. And if man, due to his average wisdom, acts, lives and thinks in the universe as simply a dream similar to his own infinite dreams, then it truly becomes that for him. Like a sleepwalker, he stumbles always, going round in circles without making progress, and finally being forced to wake up, bruised and bleeding under the natural laws he ignored. Always keep your mind on the star, but let your eyes watch your steps, lest you fall from the sky due to your upward gaze. Remember the divine paradox that the universe is not yet. Always remember the two poles of truth, the absolute and the relative. Beware of half-truths. What the hermeticists know as the law of paradox is an aspect of the principle of polarity. Hermetic writings are full of references to the emergence of paradox in the consideration of life and being problems. Instructors constantly warn their students against the error of omitting the other side of any question, especially problems of the absolute and the relative, which puzzle all philosophy students and make them think and act contrary to what is generally known as common sense. Caution all students to make sure they understand the divine paradox of the absolute and the relative, lest they remain bogged down in the swamp of half-truth. This particular lesson was written with that in mind. Read it carefully. The first thought that comes to the mind of man who thinks after realizing that the universe is a mental creation of the all is that the universe and everything it contains is a mere illusion, an unreality, an idea against which his instinct rebels. But like all other great truths, it must be considered from both the absolute and relative points of view. From the absolute point of view, of course, the universe is illusory in nature, a dream, a phantasmagoria when compared to the all itself. We acknowledge this even in our ordinary viewpoint, as we speak of the world as a fleeting spectacle, born and dying, for the element of impermanence and change, finitude and insubstantiality, must always be associated with the idea of a created universe when confronted with the idea of the all. Regardless of our beliefs regarding the nature of both, metaphysical philosophers, scientists and theologians all agree on this idea, and the thought is found in all sorts of philosophical and religious conceptions, as well as in the theories of different schools of metaphysics and theology. Thus, Hermetic teachings do not preach the insubstantiality of the universe in the strongest terms that you are familiar with. Even though its exposition of the subject may seem somewhat intimidating, anything that has a beginning and an end must in a sense be unreal and false, and the universe falls under this rule in all schools of thought. From the absolute point of view, nothing is real except the all. No matter the terms we use to reflect upon or discuss the subject, whether the universe is made of matter or is a mental creation in the mind of the all, it is insubstantial, ephemeral, a thing of time, space, and change. We want you to realize this fact thoroughly before judging the Hermetic conception of the mental nature of the universe. Reflect on each and every other conception and see if this is not true for them. But the absolute view merely shows one side of the picture. The other side is the relative. Absolute truth has been defined as things as the mind of God knows them, while relative truth is things as the highest human reason understands them. Thus, while for the all, the universe must be unreal and illusory, a mere dream or the result of meditation, yet for finite minds that are part of this universe and see it through mortal faculties, the universe is indeed very real and must be considered as such. Acknowledging the absolute standpoint does not mean ignoring or denying the facts and phenomena of the universe as they present themselves to our mortal faculties. We are not the all. Remember, for familiar illustrations, We all acknowledge the fact that matter exists for our senses. We would struggle to deny it. And yet, even our finite minds understand the scientific assertion that there is no such thing as matter from a scientific point of view. What we call matter is supposed to be simply an aggregation of atoms, atoms which are themselves simply an assembly of force units called electrons or ions, vibrating and in constant motion. We strike a stone and feel the impact. It feels real, though we know it to be only what we have established above. But remember that our foot, which feels the impact through our brain, is also matter, made up of those same electrons. And the same goes for our brain. At best, were it not for our mind, we would know nothing of our foot or the stone at all. Then the ideal of the artist or sculptor, who tries to reproduce in stone or on canvas, seems very real to him. So it is with the characters in the mind of the author or playwright, who seeks to express them so that others may recognize them. And if this is true in the case of our finite minds, what must be the degree of reality in the mental images created in the mind of the infinite? To friends for mortals, this mental universe is indeed very real. It is the only one we can ever know, even if we do not see it from plane to plane at every higher level. To know it otherwise by actual experience, we must be the all. In other words, the less we see it on the scale, the closer we come to the mind of the Father, the more the illusory nature of finite things becomes evident. But the vision does not truly vanish until the all finally absorbs us into itself. So we should not dwell on the characteristic of illusion, but rather by recognizing the real nature of the universe, let's try to understand its mental laws and strive to use them to the best of our ability in our progression through life as we travel from plane to plane of existence. The laws of the universe are no less ironclad because of their mental nature. Everything except the all is bound by them. What is in the infinite mind of the all is real to a degree only lower than that very reality, which is vested in the nature of the all. So, do not feel uncertain or fearful. We are firmly supported in the infinite mind of the all, and nothing can harm us or cause us fear. There is no power outside the all to affect us. So, let us rest calmly and confidently, calm and peacefully asleep, cradled in the bosom of the abyss, resting securely in the womb of the ocean of the infinite mind which is the all. Indeed, we live, we move, and have our being. Matter is matter to us anyway, as we dwell on the plane of matter, even though we know it to be nothing but an aggregation of rapidly vibrating electrons or force particles spinning around each other in atomic formations. Atoms in turn vibrating and spinning to form molecules, which in turn form larger masses of matter. Matter does not become any less matter as we pursue exploration even further and learn from Hermetic teachings that the force of which electrons are only units is but a manifestation of the mind of the all, and like everything else in the universe, is purely mental in its nature. As long as we are on the plane of matter, we must recognize its phenomena. We can control matter as all masters do, to a greater or lesser degree, but we do so by applying higher forces. It is folly when we try to deny the existence of matter in its relative aspect. We can deny its hold over us, and that is correct, but we should not try to ignore it in its relative aspect, at least as long as we are here on its plane. The laws of nature do not become any less constant or effective when we also know them to be mere mental creations. They have a total effect on the various planes. We transcend the lower laws by applying some of them to higher planes, and only thus can we escape the law or rise above it entirely. Nothing but the all can escape the law, for the all is the law itself, from which all laws emanate. The most advanced masters can acquire powers usually attributed to the gods of men, and there are countless ranks of beings in the great hierarchy of life, whose being and power transcend even those of the highest masters among men to a degree unthinkable for mortals. Even the highest master and highest being must bow before the law and be as nothing in the eyes of the all. So even those highest beings, whose powers surpass even those attributed by men to their gods, even these are bound and subservient to the law. So imagine the arrogance of mortal man of our race and degree when he regards the laws of nature as unreal, visionary, and illusory, simply because he is able to grasp the truth that the laws are of mental essence and are merely mental creations of the All. These laws, which the All wills to be the governing laws, must not be defied or overturned. As long as the universe lasts, they will last. For the universe exists by virtue of these laws which form its framework and hold it together. The Hermetic principle of mentalism, though it explains the true nature of the universe on the principle that all is mental, does not alter scientific conceptions of the universe, of life, or of evolution. In fact, science only corroborates Hermetic teachings. These simply teach that the nature of the universe is mental, whereas modern science has taught that it is material, or ultimately, that it is energy. Hermetic teachings find no fault with the basic principle of Herbert Spencer, which postulates the existence of an infinite and eternal energy from which all things come. In fact, Hermetics recognize in Spencer's philosophy the highest external affirmation of the operation of natural laws ever promulgated, and believe that Spencer was a reincarnation of an ancient philosopher who received in ancient Egypt thousands of years ago, and who then incarnated as Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher who lived around 500 BCE, and consider his assertion of infinite and eternal energy as directly in line with Hermetic teachings. With the key principle of Hermetic philosophy, Spencer's student will be able to open the many doors of the inner philosophical conceptions of the great English philosopher, whose work shows the results of the preparation of his previous incarnations. His teachings regarding evolution and rhythm are almost in perfect agreement with Hermetic teachings regarding the principle of rhythm. The disciple of Hermetic teachings need not set aside any of his valuable scientific insights regarding the universe. All that is asked of him is to grasp the underlying principle that the All is spirit, that the universe is mental, held in the mind of the All. He will find that the other 6 of the 7 principles will adjust to his scientific knowledge and serve to elucidate the dark points and bring light into the dark corners. It should not surprise us when we realize the influence of Hermetic thought on the ancient Greek philosophers, upon whose theories much of modern science rests. The acceptance of the first Hermetic principle, Mentalism, is the only major point of difference between modern science and Hermetic students, and science is gradually moving towards the Hermetic position in its groping for an issue from the labyrinth in which it has wandered in its quest for reality. The purpose of this lesson is to impress upon the minds of our students the fact that, for all intents and purposes, the universe and its laws and phenomena are as real to man as under the hypotheses of materialism or energism. Under any hypothesis, the universe in its external aspect is always changing, always fluid and transitory, and therefore empty of substantiality and reality. But note the other pole of truth. Under either of these same hypotheses, we are obliged to act and live as if fleeting things were real and substantial. The only difference is that under the old visions, the mental plane was ignored as a natural force, whereas under mentalism, it becomes the greatest natural force. And this one difference revolutionizes life for those who understand the principle and its resultant practical laws. So finally, students understand the advantage of mentalism and learn to know, use, and apply the laws that arise from it. But do not succumb to temptation, for, as the Kybalion says, it comes upon the wise of the middle path and hypnotizes them with the apparent reality of things, causing them to wander like dreamers dwelling in a world of dreams, ignoring practical work and the life of man, eventually shattering against the rocks and breaking apart due to their folly. Rather, follow the example of the sages, those whose same authority says they use the law against the laws, the higher against the lower, and through the art of alchemy, transform what is undesirable into what is desirable, and thus triumph. Following this authority, let us avoid the half-wisdom that is folly, ignoring the truth that mastery does not reside in abnormal dreams, visions and imaginations or fantastic experiences, but in the use of higher forces against the lower, thus escaping the sufferings of the lower planes, vibrating in the higher ones. Always remember, students, that mutation, not presumptuous denial, is the weapon of the master. The notes above are taken from the Kybalion and deserve to be entrusted to the memory of the student. We do not live in a world of dreams, but in a universe that, though relative, is as real as far as our lives and actions are concerned. Our occupation in the universe is not to deny its existence, but to live using the laws to elevate ourselves from the low to the high. Let us continue to live in the best possible way in the circumstances that present themselves each day, and live as much as possible according to our highest ideas and ideals. The true meaning of life is not known to men in this plane, if indeed it is known, but the highest authorities and our own intuitions teach us that we will make no mistake by living in the best way possible and following the universal trend in the same direction, despite appearances to the contrary. We are all on the path, and the road always leads upward, with frequent resting places. Read the message of the Kybalion, and follow the example of the sages, avoiding the error of the wise of the middle path who perish because of their folly. Chapter 7. The All in the All. While everything is in the All, it is also true that the All is in everything for one who truly understands this truth. What great knowledge has come to one who has truly understood this truth? How many times have I heard repeated by most people the assertion that their deity, called by many names, was all in all, and how few have suspected the hidden and profound truth concealed behind these casually spoken words. The commonly used expression is a survival of the ancient hermetic maxim cited above, as the Kybalion says, "To one who truly understands this truth, great knowledge comes to him." And so, let us seek this truth, whose understanding means so much in this statement of truth. This hermetic maxim hides one of the greatest philosophical, scientific, and religious truths. We have given you the hermetic teaching regarding the mental nature of the universe, the truth that the universe is mental, supported in the mind of the All, as the Kybalion says in the passage quoted above, "Everything is in the All." But does not this statement also imply that the reverse is also true, that the All is in everything? This seemingly contradictory statement is reconcilable under the law of paradox. It is even a precise hermetic affirmation of the relationships existing between the All and its mental universe. We have seen how everything is in the All. Let us now examine the other aspect of the subject. Hermetic teachings affirm that the All is immanent, remaining within, inherent, and present within its universe, and at every point, unit, or combination within the universe. This assertion is usually illustrated by instructors by referring to the principle of correspondence. The instructor asks the student to form a mental image of something, a person, an idea, something with a mental form. The favorite example is that of the author or playwright who forms an idea of his characters, or of a painter or sculptor who forms an image of an ideal he wishes to express through his art. In each case, the student will find that although the image has its existence, and being only in his own mind, nevertheless he, the student, the author, the playwright, the painter or sculptor, is also, in a sense, immanent, and remains within or resides within the mental image. In other words, the entire life, spirit, and soul in the mental image derive from the immanent mind of the thinker. Consider this for a moment until the idea is grasped. To take a modern example, let us say that Othello, Iago, Hamlet, Lear, Richard II existed only in the mind of Shakespeare at the time of their conception or creation. And yet, Shakespeare also existed within each of these characters, giving them their vitality, spirit, and action. Whose spirit are the characters we know as Micawber, Oliver Twist, Uriah Heep from? Is it Dickens, or do each of these characters have a personal spirit independent of their creator? The law of paradox explains that both propositions are true from appropriate points of view. Micawber is both Micawber and yet Dickens. And again, although it can be said that Micawber is Dickens, Micawber is not identical to Dickens. Man, like Micawber, can exclaim, "The spirit of my creator is inherent in me, and yet I am not him." How different is this from the shocking half-truth shouted loudly by some of the half-wise who fill the air with their hoarse cries asserting, "I am God." Imagine poor Micawber or Uriah Heep crying out, "I am Dickens," or one of the fools in one of Shakespeare's plays pompously proclaiming, "I am Shakespeare." Everything is in the earthworm, and yet the earthworm is far from being the all, and yet remains the wonder, that although the earthworm exists only as a vile thing, created and having its being only in the mind of the all, yet the all is immanent in the earthworm and in the particles that constitute the earthworm. Can there be a greater mystery than this, of everything in everything and the all in everything? The student realizes, of course, that the illustrations given above are necessarily imperfect and inadequate, because they represent the creation of mental images in finite minds, while the universe is a creation of the infinite mind, and the difference between the two poles separates them, and yet it is simply a matter of degree. The same principle is in operation. The principle of correspondence manifests in each, as above, so below, as below, so above. And insofar as man realizes the existence of the immanent inner spirit within his being, he will ascend the spiritual scale of life. This means spiritual development, recognition, realization, and manifestation of the spirit within us. Try to remember this last definition, that of spiritual development, containing the truth of true religion. There are many planes of being, many planes of life, many degrees of existence in the universe, and all depend on the advancement of beings on the scale, the lowest point of which is the grossest matter, being separated from the highest only by the finest division of the mind of the all. As we ascend this ladder of life, we are all seeing, all on the path, whose end is the all. All progress is a return to the source. Everything rises upward and forward, despite all appearances that seem contradictory. Such is the message of the enlightened ones. The Hermetic teachings concerning the process of the mental creation of the universe indicate that, at the beginning of the creative cycle, the all, in its aspect of being, projects its will towards its aspect of becoming, and the process of creation begins. This process consists of a lowering of vibration until a very low degree of vibrational energy is reached, at which point the grossest form of matter manifests. This process is called the stage of involution, where the all wraps itself or immerses itself in its creation. This process is supposed by the Hermeticists to have a correspondence with the mental process of an artist, writer, or inventor, who becomes so immersed in his mental creation that he almost forgets his own existence and lives almost in his creation for a time. If instead of immersed we use the word carried away, perhaps we will give a better idea of what is meant. This involuntary stage of creation is sometimes called the outpouring of divine energy, just as the evolutionary state is called absorption. The extreme pole of the creative process is considered to be farthest from the all. While the beginning of the evolutionary stage is considered the beginning of the oscillation of the pendulum's return in the rhythm, an idea of returning home supported in all Hermetic teachings. The teachings indicate that during the outpouring, vibrations become lower and lower until finally the impulse ceases and the return oscillation begins. However, there is a difference. While during the outpouring, creative forces manifest compactly and as a whole, from the beginning of the evolutionary stage or absorption, the law of individualization manifests. This is the tendency to separate into units of force, so that eventually what has left the all as individualized energy returns to its source as countless highly developed units of life, having risen higher and higher on the scale through physical, mental, and spiritual evolution. The ancient Hermeticists use the word meditation to describe the process of the mental creation of the universe in the mind of the all. They also frequently use the word contemplation. But the idea seems to be that of employing divine attention. Attention is a word derived from a Latin root meaning to stretch out, to strain. Thus, the act of attention is actually a mental extension, an extension of mental energy. Therefore, the underlying idea is easily grasped when one examines the true meaning of attention. The Hermetic teachings concerning the process of evolution indicate that the all, after meditating on the beginning of creation, after thus establishing the material foundations of the universe, thought it into existence. Then gradually it awakens or rises from its meditation. In doing so, the manifestation of the evolutionary process begins on the material, mental, and spiritual planes, successively and in order. Thus begins the upward movement, and everything begins to move towards spirit. Matter becomes less gross, units emerge, combinations begin to form, life appears and manifests in increasingly higher forms. Spirit becomes more and more apparent, constantly rising in its vibrations. Soon the entire process of evolution in all its phases begins and progresses in accordance with the established laws of the absorption process. All this takes up eons and eons of human time, each eon containing countless millions of years. Yet the enlightened ones inform us that all creation, including the involution and evolution of a universe, is but a blink of an eye for the All. At the end of countless cycles of eons, the All withdraws its attention, its contemplation, and its meditation from the universe because the great work is accomplished and everything is brought back into the All from whence it emerged. But mystery of mysteries, the spirit of every soul is not annihilated but infinitely expanded. The created and the creator merge, such is the judgment of the enlightened. The above illustration of meditation and the subsequent awakening from meditation of the All is certainly only an attempt by the instructors to describe the infinite process by a finite example. And yet, as above so below, the difference is only in degree, and just as the All rises from meditation on the universe, man in time ceases to manifest on the material plane and withdraws more and more towards the inner spiritual, which is truly the divine self. There is one more question we want to address in this lesson, and it comes very close to an incursion into the metaphysical realm of speculation. Although our intention is simply to show the futility of such speculation, we approach the question that inevitably comes to the mind of all thinkers seeking truth. The question is, why does the All create universes? The question can be asked in different ways, but this is the heart of the inquiry. Men have labored hard to answer this question, but there is still no answer worthy of man. Some have imagined that the All had something to gain from it, but this is absurd because what could the All gain that it did not already possess? Others have sought the answer in the idea that the All desired something to accomplish, and still others thought it created out of pleasure or amusement, or because it was lonely, or to manifest its power. All these explanations and ideas are childish and belong to the infantile period of thought. Others have attempted to explain the mystery by supposing that the All was compelled to create because of its own internal nature, its creative instinct. This idea is more advanced than the others, but its weakness lies in the notion that the All would be constrained by something, internal or external. If its internal nature or creative instinct compelled it to do something, then that internal nature or creative instinct would be the absolute rather than the All, and thus, according to that part of the proposition, it collapses. However, the All creates and manifests and seems to find some satisfaction in doing so. It is difficult to escape the conclusion that in an infinite degree it must have what would correspond to an internal nature or creative instinct. In man, with infinite corresponding desire and will, he could not act if he did not wish to act, and he would not wish to act if he did not derive satisfaction. All these things would belong to an internal nature and could be postulated as existing in accordance with the law of correspondence. But we still prefer to think that the All acts entirely free from any influence, internal or external. That is where the problem lies, and the difficulty is at the root of the problem. Strictly speaking, one could not say that there is any reason for the All to act, for a reason implies a cause, and the All is above cause and effect, except when it wills to become the cause, at which point the principle is set in motion. So you see, matter is necessary, just as the All is unknowable, just as we say the All is simply as it is. We are compelled to say the All acts because it acts. In the end, the All is all reason in itself, all law in itself, all action in itself, and one can say with certainty that the All is its own reason, its own law, its own act, or even further that the All, its reason, its act, its law are one, all names for the same thing. According to the opinion of those who give you the present lessons, the answer is locked within the internal being of the All, with its secret of existence. The law of correspondence, in our view, extends only to that aspect of the All which can be spoken of as the aspect of becoming. Behind this aspect, there is the aspect of being, in which all laws merge into one law, all principles merge into one principle, and the All, principle and being are identical, one and the same thing. Therefore, metaphysical speculation on this point is useful. We enter here into the question simply to show that we recognize the question and also the absurdity of the ordinary responses of metaphysics and theology. In conclusion, it may be interesting for our students to know that, although some of the ancient and modern Hermetic instructors have rather leaned in the direction of applying the principle of correspondence to the question, leading to the conclusion of internal nature, however, the legends say that the great Hermes, when asked this question by his advanced students, responded by firmly pressing his lips together without saying a word, indicating that there was no answer, but he might also have wanted to apply the axiom of his philosophy that the lips of wisdom are closed, except to the ears of understanding. I even think that his advanced students did not possess the understanding that qualified them for teaching. In any case, if Hermes possessed the secret, he chose not to transmit it, and as far as the world is concerned, the lips of Hermes remain closed on this matter, and where the great Hermes hesitated to speak, what mortal could dare to teach? But remember that whatever the answer to this problem, if there really is one, the truth remains that while everything is in the all, it is also true that the all is in everything. The teaching at this stage is categorical, and we can add the concluding words of the note. For one who truly understands this truth, great knowledge has come to him. Chapter 8. The planes of correspondence, as above, so below, as below, so above. The great second Hermetic principle incorporates the truth that there is harmony, agreement, and correspondence between the different planes of manifestation, life and being. This truth is such because everything included in the universe emanates from the same source, and the same laws, principles, and characteristics apply to each unit or combination of units of activity, while each manifests its own phenomena on its own plane. For the sake of convenience of thought and study, Hermetic philosophy considers that the universe can be divided into three great classes of phenomena, known as the three great planes, namely 1. The great physical plane, 2. The great mental plane, and 3. The great spiritual plane. These divisions are more or less artificial and arbitrary, for the truth is that these three divisions are only ascending degrees of the great scale of life, whose lowest point is undifferentiated matter and whose highest point is spirit. Furthermore, the different planes overlap each other, so that no sharp and distinct division can be made between the higher phenomena of the physical and the lower of the mental, or between the higher of the mental and the lower of the spiritual. In short, the three great planes may be considered as the three great groups of degrees of manifestation of life. Since the objectives of this little book do not allow us to enter into an extended discussion or explanation on the subject of these different planes, we nevertheless believe it opportune to give a general explanation on this subject at this stage. At the outset, we may consider the question so often asked by the neophyte who wishes to be informed on the meaning of the word plane, a term which has been used very freely and very poorly explained in many recent works on the subject of occultism. The question is generally as follows: is a plane a place with dimensions, or is it simply a condition or a state? We answer no, it is neither a place nor even an ordinary dimension of space, and yet more than a state or condition, it is rather a degree in a scale subject to measurement. Something paradoxical, isn't it? But let us examine the question. A dimension, you know, is a measurement on a straight line relative to the measurement, etc. The ordinary dimensions of space are length, width, and height, or perhaps length, width, height, thickness, or circumference. But there is another dimension of created things or measured, in a straight line, known to occultists and also to scientists, although the latter have not yet applied the term dimension to it. And this new dimension, which incidentally is the fourth dimension on which many have speculated, is the standard used to determine degrees or planes. This fourth dimension can be called the dimension of vibration. It is well known to modern science as well as to hermeticists, who have incorporated the truth into their third Hermetic principle, that everything is in motion, everything vibrates, nothing is still, from the highest manifestation to the lowest, everything and all things vibrate. Not only do they vibrate at different degrees of movement, but also in different directions and in different ways. The degrees of frequency of vibrations constitute the degrees of measurement in the scale of vibrations, in other words, the degrees of the fourth dimension. And these degrees form what occultists call planes. The higher the degree of vibrational frequency, the higher the plane, and the higher the manifestation of life that occupies that place. So, while a plane is neither a place nor even a state or condition, it nevertheless possesses qualities common to both. We shall have more to say on the subject of the scale of vibrations in our later lessons, where we shall examine the Hermetic principle of vibration. Please remember, however, that the three great planes are not true divisions of the phenomena of the universe, but merely arbitrary terms used by hermeticists to aid in the thought and study of the various degrees and forms of universal activity and life. The atom of matter, the unit of force, the mind of man, and the being of the archangel are all only degrees in a scale, and all fundamentally the same thing, the difference between them being only a matter of degree and frequency of vibration. All are creations of the All, and have their existence only in the infinite mind of the All. The Hermeticists subdivide each of the three great planes into 7 minor planes, and each of these is also subdivided into 7 subplanes. All these divisions overlap each other and are adopted simply for the convenience of study and scientific reflection. The great physical plane and its 7 minor planes are that division of the phenomena of the universe, which includes everything concerning physics or material things, forces, and material manifestations. This includes all forms of ego that we call matter, as well as all forces of what we call energy or force. But you must remember that Hermetic philosophy does not recognize matter as a thing in itself or having separate existence, even in the mind of the All. The teachings are that matter is nothing but a form of energy, that is, energy at a low frequency of vibrations of a certain kind, and according to this, Hermeticists classify matter under the category of energy and attribute 3 of the 7 minor planes of the great physical plane to it. These 7 minor physical planes are as follows. The matter A plane includes forms of matter in the form of solids, liquids, and gases, as generally recognized in physics textbooks. The matter B plane includes certain higher and subtler forms of matter, whose existence is only now being recognized by modern science, belonging to the phenomena of radiant matter in its phases of radio, etc. At the lower subdivision of this minor plane, the matter C plane includes the most subtle and tenuous forms of matter, whose existence is not suspected by ordinary scientists. The etheric substance plane includes what science speaks of as the ether, a substance of extreme subtlety and elasticity, permeating all universal space and acting as a medium for the transmission of energy waves such as light, heat, electricity, etc. This etheric substance forms a connecting link between the so-called matter and energy and partakes of the nature of each. However, Hermetic teachings instruct that this plane has 7 subdivisions, just like all minor planes, and that in reality there are 7 ethers instead of just 1. Next above the etheric substance plane is the energia plane, which includes the ordinary forms of energy known to science, its 7 respective subplanes being heat, light, magnetism, electricity, and attraction, including gravitation, cohesion, chemical affinity, etc., and several other forms of energy indicated by scientific experiments but not yet named or classified. The energy B plane includes 7 subplanes of higher forms of energy undiscovered by science but called the finest forces of nature, employed in the manifestations of certain forms of mental phenomena and through which such phenomena become possible. The energy C plane includes 7 subplanes of energy, so highly organized that it exhibits many characteristics of life, but is not recognized by ordinary minds in the usual plane of development, being available only for use by beings of the spiritual plane. Such energy is inconceivable to ordinary man and may be considered as a divine power. Beings who use it are like gods compared even to the highest human types not known. The great mental plane includes those forms of living things known to us in ordinary life, as well as some other forms less well known except to the occultist. The classification of the 7 minor mental planes is more or less satisfactory and arbitrary unless accompanied by explanations which are foreign to the purpose of this particular work. But we may mention them. They are as follows: the mineral spirit plane, the elemental spirit A plane, the plant spirit plane, the elemental spirit B plane, the animal spirit plane, the elemental spirit C plane, and the human spirit plane. The mineral spirit plane includes the states or conditions of units or entities or groups and combinations thereof, animating forms known to us as minerals, chemical substances, etc. These entities must not be confused with molecules, atoms, and corpuscles themselves, for these latter are the bodies or material forms of these entities, just as a man's body is but his material form and not the man himself. These entities may be termed souls in a sense, and are living beings of a low degree of development of life and mind, just a little higher than the living energy units composing the higher subdivisions of the highest physical plane. Common thought generally does not attribute mind, soul, or life possession to the mineral kingdom, but all occultists recognize its existence, and modern science is rapidly advancing towards the hermetic view on this subject. Molecules, atoms, and corpuscles have their loves and hates, their likes and dislikes, their attractions and repulsions, their affinities and non-affinities, etc. And some of the boldest of modern scientific thought have expressed the opinion that the desires, will, emotions, and feelings of atoms differ only in degree from those of men. We have neither the time nor the space to discuss this subject here. All occultists know it to be a fact, and others are referred to some of the latest scientific works for external confirmation. There are 7 usual subdivisions for this plane: the elemental spirit. A plane includes the state or condition of the degree of mental and vital development of a class of entities unknown to ordinary man, but recognized by occultists. They are invisible to man's ordinary senses, but nevertheless exist and play their part in the drama of the universe. Their degree of intelligence lies between that of mineral and chemical entities on the one hand, and that of entities of the vegetable kingdom on the other. There are 7 subdivisions for this plane also. The vegetable spirit plane, in its 7 subdivisions, includes the states or conditions of entities which include the realms of the vegetable world, whose vital and mental phenomena are fairly well understood by the intelligent person. Many new and interesting scientific works concerning spirit and life in plants have been published during the past decade. Plants have life, mind, and souls, just as animals, humans, and superhumans. The elemental spirit B plane, in its 7 subdivisions, includes the states and conditions of a higher form of elemental or invisible entities playing a part in the general work of the universe, whose spirit and life are part of the scale between the vegetable spirit plane and the animal spirit plane, these entities partaking of the nature of both. The animal spirit plane, in its 7 subdivisions, includes the states and conditions of entities, beings, or souls animating the familiar animal forms of life known to us all. It is not necessary to detail this kingdom or plane of life, for the animal world is as familiar to us as our own. The elemental spirit C plane, in its 7 subdivisions, includes those entities or invisible beings, such as all these elemental forms which share the nature of life, both animal and human, to some degree and in certain combinations. The higher forms are semi-human in intelligence. The human spirit plane, in its 7 subdivisions, includes those manifestations of life and mentality which are common to man in its various degrees, gradations, and divisions. In this regard, we wish to emphasize the fact that the ordinary man of today occupies only the 4th subdivision of the human spirit plane, and only the most intelligent have crossed the boundaries of the 5th subdivision. It has taken millions of years for the race to reach this stage, and it will take many more years for the race to pass to the 6th and 7th subdivisions and beyond. But remember, there have been races before ours that have crossed these degrees and reached higher planes. Our own race is the 5th, with laggards from the 4th who have set foot on the path. There are also some advanced souls of our own race who have surpassed the masses and reached the 6th and 7th subdivisions, some going even further. The man of the 6th subdivision will be the Superman, and that of the 7th will be above man. In our consideration of the 7 minor mental planes, we have only made reference to the 3 elemental planes in a general way, We do not wish to enter into this subject in detail in this work, as it is not part of this portion of philosophy and general teachings. But we can say this to give you a somewhat clearer idea of the relations of these planes to the more familiar ones. The elemental planes bear the same relation to the planes of mineral, vegetable, animal, and human mentality and life as the black keys of the piano bear to the white keys. The white keys suffice to produce music. However, there are certain scales, melodies, and harmonies in which the black keys play their part and where their presence is necessary. They are necessary also as connecting links of soul conditions, entity states, etc., among the various other planes, thus accomplishing certain types of development. This latter fact will give the reader who can read between the lines a new light on the processes of evolution and a new key to the secret door of life passages between kingdom and kingdom. The great kingdoms of the elementals are fully recognized by all occultists, and esoteric writings are filled with them. Readers of these and similar non-Nonian accounts will recognize the entities inhabiting these planes of life. Advancing from the grand mental plane to the grand spiritual plane, what shall we say? How can we explain these higher states of being, life, and mentality to minds still incapable of grasping and understanding the higher subdivisions of the human spirit plane? The task is impossible. We can only speak in the most general terms. How describe light to a man born blind, sweetness to a man who has never tasted anything sweet, harmony to a deaf person? All we can say is that the 7 minor planes of the grand spiritual plane, each with its 7 subdivisions, contain beings possessing a life, a spirit, and a form far above those of today's man, just as the latter is above the earthworm, the mineral, or even some forms of energy or matter. The life of these beings transcends ours so greatly that we cannot even envision the details of it. Their minds transcend ours so greatly that to them we barely seem to think, and our mental processes seem almost akin to material processes. The matter of which their forms are composed comes from the highest planes of matter. Some even say they are clothed in pure energy. What of these beings in the 7 minor planes of the grand spiritual plane? There are beings we can speak of as angels, archangels, demigods in the lower planes. These house those great souls we call masters and adepts. Above them come the great hierarchies of the angelic hosts, inconceivable to man, and above them come those who might, without irreverence, be called gods, so high in the scale of being that their being, intelligence, and power are akin to those attributed by races of men to their concepts of divinity. These beings are beyond even the highest flights of human imagination, the only applicable expression to them being the word divinity. Many of these beings, as well as the angelic hosts, take great interest in the affairs of the universe and play a major role in its affairs. Their occasional intervention and assistance in human affairs have given rise to many legends, religious beliefs, and traditions of past and present races. They have imposed their knowledge and power on the world many times, but all under the law of the all. However, even the highest of these advanced beings exist merely as creations of the all, and in the mind of the all, and are subject to cosmic processes and universal laws. They remain mortal. We could call them gods if we wished, but they are still not the elders of the race. The advanced souls who have surpassed their brethren and forsaken the ecstasy of absorption by the all to aid the race in its ascent are still above them. These beings belong to the universe and are subject to its conditions. They are mortal, and their plane is inferior to that of the absolute spirit. Only the most advanced hermetists are capable of grasping the inner teachings regarding the state of existence and powers manifested in the spiritual planes. The phenomena are so superior to those of the mental planes that any attempt to describe them would certainly result in confusion of ideas. Only those whose minds have been carefully trained in the ways of Hermetic philosophy for years, those who have brought with them from past incarnations the knowledge acquired before, can understand exactly what the teaching concerning these spiritual planes means. For occultists, the word spirit is used in the sense of the animating principle, carrying with it the idea of living energy power, mystical force, etc. Occultists know that what they know as spiritual power can be used for both evil and good purposes, in accordance with the principle of polarity, a fact recognized by most religions in their conceptions of Satan, Beelzebub, Lucifer, fallen angels, etc. Thus, knowledge concerning these planes has been preserved in the innermost sanctum of all esoteric fraternities and occult orders, in the secret chamber of the temple. It can therefore be said here that those who have acquired high spiritual powers and have misused them have a terrible fate awaiting them, and the swinging of the pendulum of rhythm will inevitably bring them back to the farthest end of material existence, from which they will have to begin their journey back to spirit through the wearying detours of the path, but always with the added torture of keeping in memory the heights from which they fell because of their wrongful actions. The legends of the fallen angels have a basis in true facts, as all advanced occultists know. The effort for selfish power in the spiritual planes inevitably leads to the selfish soul losing its spiritual balance and falling back as far as it had previously progressed. However, even to such a soul, an opportunity for return is offered, and such souls undertake the journey back by paying a terrible penalty in accordance with the unchanging law. In conclusion, we wanted to remind you, in accordance with the principle of correspondence that integrates the truth that what is above is like what is below, as what is below is like what is above, all 7 Hermetic principles are fully in action in the many physical, mental, and spiritual planes. The principle of mental substance applies, of course, to all planes, as all are sustained in the mind of the all. The principle of correspondence manifests in all planes, for there is a correspondence, a harmony, and an accord among the different planes. The principle of vibration manifests in all planes, for the very differences that create the planes emerge from vibration, as we have explained. The principle of polarity manifests on each plane, the extremes of the poles appearing opposite and contradictory. The principle of rhythm manifests on each plane, the movement of phenomena having its ebb and flow, its rise and fall, its infusion and diffusion. The principle of cause and effect manifests on each plane, each effect having its cause and each cause having its effect. The principle of gender manifests on each plane, creative energy always being present and operating along the lines of its masculine and feminine aspects. As above, so below. As below, so above. This ancient hermetic action for centuries incorporates one of the great principles of universal phenomena. As we proceed in our consideration of the other principles, we will see more clearly the truth of the universal nature of this great principle of correspondence. Chapter 9. Vibration. Nothing rests, everything is in motion, everything vibrates. The great third Hermetic principle, the principle of vibration, incorporates the truth that energy is manifested in everything in the universe, that nothing is still, that everything moves, vibrates, and rotates. This Hermetic principle was recognized by some of the early Greek philosophers who integrated it into their systems, but it was lost sight of for centuries by thinkers outside the Hermetic ranks. More in the 19th century, physical science discovered the truth, and the scientific discoveries of the 20th century added further evidence to the accuracy and truth of this ancient Hermetic doctrine. The Hermetic teachings not only teach that everything is in constant motion and vibration, but also that the differences between the various manifestations of universal power are entirely due to the degree and variable mode of vibrations. Not only that, but even the whole itself manifests a constant vibration of an infinitely intense degree and rapid movement, so much so that it can practically be considered at rest. Instructors direct students' attention to the fact that even on the physical plane, a rapidly moving object, such as a spinning wheel, appears to be at rest. The teachings indicate that the mind is at one extreme of the vibration pole. Being the other pole, certain extremely coarse forms of matter, between these two poles, there exist millions and millions of degrees and modes of different vibrations. Modern science has proven that everything we call matter and energy is nothing but modes of vibratory motion. Some of the most advanced scientists are quickly moving towards the position of occultists who argue that mental phenomena are also modes of vibration or emotion. Let's see what science has to say about the issue of vibrations in matter and energy. First of all, science teaches that all matter manifests to some degree vibrations arising from temperature or heat. An object, cold or hot, both being simply degrees of the same things, manifests certain vibrations of heat and, in that sense, is in motion and vibration. Furthermore, all particles of matter are in circular motion, from elementary particles to suns. Planets revolve around suns, and many of them also rotate on their axes. Suns move around larger central points, and it is thought they move around even larger ones, and so on to infinity. The molecules composing different types of matter are in a state of constant vibration and motion, rotating around each other and colliding with each other. Molecules are composed of atoms which, likewise, are in a state of constant motion and vibration. Atoms are composed of particles sometimes called electrons, ions, etc., which are also in a state of rapid motion, rotating around each other and manifesting a very fast state and mode of vibration. Thus, we see that all forms of matter manifest vibration in accordance with the Hermetic principle of vibration, and the same goes for different forms of energy. Science teaches that light, heat, magnetism, and electricity are nothing but forms of vibratory motion, somehow connected to the etheric world and probably emanating from it. Science still does not attempt to explain the nature of phenomena such as cohesion, which is the principle of molecular attraction, nor chemical affinity, which is the principle of atomic attraction, nor gravitation, the greatest mystery of the three, which is the principle of attraction by which every particle or mass of matter is linked to every other particle or mass. These three forms of energy are still not understood by science. However, writers lean towards the opinion that these too are manifestations of some form of vibratory energy, a fact that Hermetists have supported and taught for ages past. The universal ether, postulated by science without its nature being clearly understood, is upheld by Hermetists who regard it as a higher manifestation of what is mistakenly called matter, i.e., matter at a higher level of vibration, and call it ethereal substance. Hermetists teach that this ethereal substance is of extreme tenuity and elasticity, penetrating universal space as a medium for transmitting waves of vibratory energy, such as heat, light, electricity, magnetism, etc. The teachings indicate that the ethereal substance is a link between known forms of vibratory energy, called matter on one side and energy or force on the other, and also manifests a degree of vibration in frequency and mode totally unique. Scientists have given the illustration of a rapidly spinning wheel or cylinder to show the effects of increasing vibratory frequencies. The illustration supposes a wheel, a spinning top toy, or a cylinder rotating at a slow speed. We will call this the object. Following the illustration, suppose it is moving slowly. This can be easily seen, but no sound of its movement reaches the ear. The speed is gradually increased, and in a few moments its movement becomes so fast that a deep growl or low note can be heard. Then, as the frequency increases, the note rises on the musical scale. By further increasing the frequency, the movements bring out the next higher note. Then, one after another, all the notes of the musical scale appear, rising higher and higher as the emotion increases. Finally, when the movements reach a certain frequency, the last audible note for human ears is reached, and the high-pitched and piercing scream fades into silence. No sound is audible coming from the revolving object, the frequency of emotion being so high that the human ear cannot record the vibrations. Then comes the perception of increasing degrees of heat. After some time, the eye perceives a glimpse that the object takes on a reddish, dark and subdued tint as the frequency increases. The red becomes brighter. Then, as the speed increases, the red blends into orange, the orange blends into yellow. Then, the tones of green, blue, indigo, and finally violet succeed each other as the degree of speed increases. Then the violet fades away and all colors disappear, the human eye not being capable of registering them, but there are invisible rays emanating from the revolving object, rays used in photography and other subtle rays of light. Then begin to manifest the particular rays known as X-rays, etc., as the constitution of the object changes. When the object reaches the appropriate degree of vibration, it emits electricity and magnetism. When the object reaches a certain frequency of vibration, Its molecules disintegrate and resolve into original elements or atoms. Then the atoms, following the principle of vibration, are separated into countless particles of which they are composed, and finally even these particles disappear. It can then be said that the object is composed of ethereal substance. Science dares not go further into the illustration, but Hermetists teach that if the vibrations were to continue to increase, the object would pass through successive states of manifestation and in turn express the different mental stages, finally ascending back to spirit, until it once again becomes a part of the whole, the absolute spirit. However, the object would have ceased to be an object long before reaching the stage of ethereal substance. But on the other hand, the illustration is correct insofar as it shows the effect of constantly increasing degrees and modes of vibration. It must be remembered that in the stages where the object emits vibrations of light, heat, etc., it does not actually transform into these forms of energy, which are much higher on the scale, but simply reaches a degree of vibration where these forms of energy are released, to a degree barely influenced by its respective molecules, atoms, and particles. These forms of energy, much higher on the scale than matter, are trapped and contained in material combinations due to the energies manifesting through them and utilizing material forms. Although they are thus trapped and confined in their material form creations, which is somewhat true for all creations, the creative force is enveloped within its creation. But the Hermetic teachings go far beyond what modern science does. They teach that every manifestation of thought, emotion, reason, will or desire, or any mental state or condition is accompanied by vibrations, part of which is emitted and tends to influence the minds of others through induction. This is the principle that produces phenomena such as telepathy, mental influence, and other forms of mind-to-mind action and power, with which the general public is rapidly becoming familiar due to the widespread dissemination of occult knowledge by various schools, cults, and instructors. Following these lines in our time, every thought, emotion, or mental state has its own corresponding degree and mode of vibration. Through an effort of will of the individual or others, these mental states can be reproduced, just as a musical note can be reproduced by vibrating an instrument at a certain frequency, or a color can be reproduced by knowledge of the principle of vibration applied to mental phenomena. Thus, one can polarize one's mind to any desired degree, gaining perfect control over one's mental states, moods, etc. Similarly, one can influence the minds of others by producing in them the desired mental states. In a short time, one may be able to produce on the mental plane what science produces on the physical plane, namely vibrations at will. This power, of course, can only be acquired through instruction, practical exercise, etc., as the science of mental transmutation is one branch of the Hermetic art. A brief reflection on what we have said will show the student that the principle of vibration underlies the wonderful phenomena of power manifested by the masters and adepts who seem to circumvent the laws of nature, but who actually use one law against another, one principle against others, and achieve their results by changing the vibrations of material objects or forms of energy. Thus do they accomplish what is commonly called miracles. As one of the ancient Hermetic authors truthfully said, "He who understands the principle of vibration has grasped the scepter of power." Chapter 10. Polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has two poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Likes and dislikes are the same thing. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. The fourth great Hermetic principle, the principle of polarity, incorporates the truth that all manifested things have two sides, two aspects, two poles, a pair of opposites with multiple degrees between the two extremes. The old riddles that have always puzzled men's minds are explained by understanding this principle. Man has always recognized something like this principle and has attempted to express it through sayings, maxims, and aphorisms such as this one. Everything is and is not at the same time. All truths are but half-truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything. There is a reverse to every medal, etc. The Hermetic teachings declare that the difference between seemingly opposite things, diametrically opposed, is simply a matter of degree. They teach that pairs of opposites can be reconciled and that thesis and antithesis are identical in nature, but different in degree. They assert that the universal reconciliation of opposites occurs through the recognition of this principle of polarity. Instructors claim to be able to illustrate this principle in multiple ways by examining the actual nature of everything. They begin by demonstrating that mind and matter are just the two poles of the same thing, with the intermediate planes representing only degrees of vibration. They show that the whole and the multiples are the same thing, with the difference being only a matter of degree of mental manifestation. Thus, law and laws are the two opposite poles of the same thing, just as principle and principles, infinite spirit and finite spirits. Then they illustrate this principle on the physical plane by showing that heat and cold are identical in nature, with differences being only a matter of degrees. The thermometer shows many degrees of temperature, the lowest being called cold and the highest hot. Between these two poles, there are many degrees of heat or cold. The terms high and low that we are compelled to use are just the poles of the same thing. Terms are relative, just as east and west. If you travel around the world eastward, you will reach a point called west at your starting point. And returning from that point westward, you will travel north, God knows, travel south, or vice versa. Light and darkness are also poles of the same thing, with many degrees between them. The musical scale is the same, starting with do, rising until reaching another do, and so on, with the differences between the two ends being the same, with many degrees between them. The same goes for the color scale, with the only difference between high violet and low red being higher or lower vibrations. Big and small are relative, just like noise and silence, hard and soft, sharp and blunt. Positive and negative are two poles of the same thing, with countless degrees between them. Good and evil are not absolute. We call one extreme of the scale good and the other evil, or one extreme good and the other evil, according to the usage of terms. One thing is less good than the one above it on the scale, but that less good thing is in turn better than the next one below, and so on, with more or less being regulated by the position on the scale. The same holds true on the mental plane. Love and hate are generally considered diametrically opposed, totally different, and reconcilable. But when we apply the principle of polarity, we find that there are no such things as absolute love or absolute hate as different from each other. Both are only terms applied to the two poles of the same thing. Starting from any point on the scale, we find more love or less hate as we ascend the scale, and more hate or less love as we descend. This being true, no matter how high or low we might start, there are degrees of love and hate, and there is a midpoint where pleasure and displeasure become so faint that it is difficult to distinguish them. Courage and fear also fall under this rule. Pairs of opposites exist everywhere. Where you find one thing, you find its opposite, the two poles. And it is this fact that enables the hermetist to transmute one mental state into another along the lines of polarization. Things belonging to different classes cannot be transmuted into each other, but things of the same class can change their polarity. Thus, love never transforms into west, red, or violet, but can and often does transform into hate. Similarly, hate can be transformed into love by changing its polarity. Courage can be transmuted into fear and vice versa. Hard things can become soft, blunt things become sharp, hot things become cold, and so forth. Transmutation always occurs between things of the same class but of different degrees. Take the case of a fearful man. Raising his mental vibrations along the fear line, courage can be filled with the highest degree of courage and boldness. Similarly, the lazy man can be changed into an active and energetic individual simply by polarizing along the lines of the desired quality. The student familiar with the processes by which the various schools of mental science produce changes in the mental states of those who follow their teachings cannot easily understand the principle underlying many of these changes. However, once the principle of polarity is understood, and mental changes are seen as caused by a change in polarity, a slide along the same scale, the matter becomes easier to understand. The change is not of the nature of transmuting one thing into another, completely different, but simply a change of degree in the same things, a very important difference. For example, borrowing an analogy from the physical plane, it is impossible to change heat into sharpness, noise, pitch, etc., but heat can easily be transmuted into cold simply by lowering vibrations. Similarly, hate and love are mutually transmutable, as are fear and courage, but fear cannot be transformed into love nor courage into hate. Mental states belong to countless classes, each having its opposite poles along which transmutation is possible. The student will easily recognize that mental states, just like phenomena on the physical plane, both have positive and negative poles respectively. Thus, love is positive compared to hate, courage compared to fear, activity compared to inactivity, etc. And it will also be noticed that even for those not familiar with the principle of vibration, the positive pole seems to be of a higher degree than the negative and easily dominates the tendency of nature. It is in the direction of the dominant activity of the positive pole that nature goes. In addition to changing the poles of mental states themselves by the operation of the art of polarization, the phenomena of mental influence in their simple phases show us that the principle can be extended to encompass the phenomena of the influence of one mind over another, on which much has been written and taught in recent years. When it is understood that mental induction is possible, that is, mental states can be produced by induction from others, one can easily see how a certain frequency of vibration or polarization of a certain mental state can be transmitted to another person and thus change their polarity in that class of mental states. It is on this principle that the results of many mental treatments rest. For example, a person is sad, melancholic, and full of fear. An individual, by raising their mental vibration to the desired vibration through their trained will, and thus obtaining the desired polarization in their own case, then produces a similar mental state in the other by induction. The result is that vibrations are raised, and the person is polarized towards the positive end of the scale instead of towards the negative, and their fear and other negative emotions are transmuted into courage and other similar positive mental states. A little study will show you that mental changes lie almost all along the line of polarization, the change being more a matter of degree than of class. A knowledge of the existence of this great hermetic principle will enable the student to better understand their own mental states and those of others. They will see that all these states are simply a matter of degree, and by understanding this will be able to raise or lower vibration at will, change their mental poles, and thus become the master of their mental states rather than being their servant and slave. Through their knowledge, they will be able to intelligently assist their fellows and, by appropriate methods, change polarity when desirable. We recommend to all students to become familiar with this principle of polarity, as a correct understanding of it will illuminate many difficult subjects. Chapter 11, Rhythm. Everything flows outward and inward. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in all. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. The great fifth hermetic principle, the principle of rhythm, incorporates the truth that in all things is manifested a measured motion, a movement forward and backward, a ebb and flow, an oscillation back and forth, a pendulum swing, a decrease and growth like a tide. The principle of rhythm is closely related to the principle of polarity described in the previous chapter. Rhythm manifests between the two poles established by the principle of polarity. However, this does not mean that the pendulum of rhythm swings towards the extreme poles, as this rarely happens. In fact, it is rather to establish the extreme polar opposites in most cases, but the swing is always towards one pole first, then towards the other. There is always action and reaction, advancement and retreat, elevation and descent, manifested in all domains and phenomena of the universe, whether on the physical, mental, or spiritual planes. The principle of rhythm is evident in the creation and destruction of worlds, in the rise and fall of nations, in the history of the life of all things, and finally, in the mental states of man. Starting with the manifestations of the mind, one will always notice the effusion and absorption, the exhalation and inhalation of Brahma, as the Brahmins describe it. Universes are created, reach their extreme low point of materiality, and then begin their oscillation upward. Suns emerge into existence, then reach their peak of power. The process of regression begins, and the suns become inert masses of matter, awaiting another impulse that will awaken their internal energies to activity again, and a new cycle of solar life begins. And so it is with all worlds. They are born, grow, and die, only to be reborn. And so it is with all things, from action to reaction, from birth to death, from activity to inactivity, and then back again. So it is with all living things. They are born, grow, die, and are reborn. The same is true for all great philosophical movements, beliefs, fashions, governments, nations, and everything else. Birth, growth, maturity, decline, death, and then new birth. The swing of the pendulum is always evident. Night follows day, day follows night. The pendulum swings from summer to winter, then swings back again. Corpuscles, atoms, molecules, and all masses of matter oscillate around the circle of their nature. There is no absolute rest, nor sensation of movement, and all movement partakes of rhythm. This principle is of universal application. It can be applied to any inquiry or phenomenon in any of the many phases of life, in all phases of human activity. There is always the rhythmic oscillation from one pole to the other. The universal pendulum is always in motion. The waves of life ebb and flow according to the law. The principle of rhythm is well understood by modern science and considered a universal law when applied to material things. But the Hermetists go much further and know that its manifestations and influence extend to the mental activities of man, thus explaining the bewildering succession of moods, feelings, and other tedious and perplexing changes that we notice in ourselves. However, in studying the operations of this principle, the Hermetic masters have learned to escape some of its activities through transmutation. They have discovered that, although the principle of rhythm is invariable and always evident in mental phenomena, there are nevertheless two planes of its manifestation concerning mental phenomena. They have found that there are two general planes of consciousness, the lower and the higher. Understanding this fact has enabled them to rise to the higher plane and thus escape the oscillation of the rhythmic pendulum manifested in the lower plane. In other words, the swing of the pendulum occurs in the unconscious plane, and consciousness is not affected by it. They called it the law of neutralization. Its operations consist in raising the ego above the vibrations of the unconscious plane of mental activity, so that the negative swing of the pendulum does not manifest in consciousness, and therefore they are not affected. It is like rising above something and letting it pass underneath. The Hermetic master or advanced student polarizes themselves to the desired pole, and, by a similar process of refusing to participate in the backward swing, or, if you prefer, denying its influence over them, they remain firmly in their polarized position and allow the mental pendulum to swing backward along the unconscious plane. All individuals who have attained a certain degree of self-mastery realize this more or less unconsciously. By refusing to allow their negative moods and mental states to affect them, they apply the law of neutralization. The master, however, carries this to a much higher degree of efficiency, and through the use of their will, achieves a degree of mental balance and firmness almost impossible to believe for those who allow themselves to be swung back and forth by the mental pendulum of moods and feelings. The importance of this will be appreciated by any thoughtful person who realizes how much the rhythmical oscillations have affected their life. A moment of enthusiasm has invariably been followed by an opposite feeling and mood of depression. Similarly, your periods of courage have been followed by equal moods of fear. And so it has always been for most people. They have always risen and fallen with the tides of feeling, but they have never suspected the cause or reason for mental phenomena. Understanding how this principle operates will give everyone the key to mastering these rhythmic oscillations of feeling and will enable them to better know themselves and avoid being carried away by these influences. Will is superior to the conscious manifestation of this principle, although the principle itself can never be destroyed. We can escape its effects, but the principle operates nevertheless. The pendulum always swings. Although we may avoid being carried along with it, there are other aspects of the operation of this principle of rhythm that we wish to speak of at this point. This is where the operations of what is called the law of compensation come into play. One of the definitions or meanings of the word compensate is to counterbalance. This is the sense in which the Hermetists use the term. It is to this law of compensation that the Kybalion refers when it says that the measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. The law of compensation means that the swing in one direction determines the swing in the opposite direction or to the opposite pole. One balances or counterbalances the other. On the physical plane, we see many examples of this law. The pendulum of the clock swings a certain distance to the right, then an equal distance to the left. Seasons balance each other in the same way, tides follow the same law, and the same law is manifested in all phenomena of rhythm. A pendulum with a short swing in one direction has only a short swing in the other, while a long swing to the right invariably means a long swing to the left. An object thrown upwards to a certain height must travel an equal distance on its return downwards. The force with which it is sent upwards is reproduced when it returns to Earth on its return journey. This law is constant on the physical plane, as you will be shown by reference to model authorities. But the Hermetists go even further in teaching that the mental states of a man are subject to the same law. The man who enjoys intensely is subject to intense suffering, while he who feels only little pain can feel only little joy. The pig suffers only little mentally and enjoys only little. He is compensated, and on the other hand there are other animals who enjoy intensely, but whose nervous system and temperament make them experience exquisite degrees of pain. The same is true for man. There are temperaments that allow only low degrees of joy and equally low degrees of suffering, while others allow for more intense joy but also more intense suffering. The rule is that the capacity to feel pain and pleasure in each individual is balanced. The law of compensation is fully operational here, but the Hermetists go even further on this issue. They teach that for a person to enjoy a certain degree of pleasure, they must have oscillated proportionally as far toward the other pole of feeling. However, they argue that the negative precedes the positive in this matter, meaning that experiencing a certain degree of pleasure does not necessarily entail paying for it with a corresponding degree of pain. On the contrary, pleasure is rhythmic oscillation in accordance with the law of compensation for a degree of pain previously experienced, whether in the present life or in a previous incarnation. This sheds new light on the problem of pain. The Hermetists view the chain of lives as continuous and part of the individual's life, so rhythmic oscillation is thus understood. It would be meaningless if the truth of reincarnation were not admitted. But the Hermetists argue that the master or advanced student is capable, to a large extent, of escaping oscillation toward pain through the process of neutralization mentioned earlier, by rising to the higher plane of the ego. Much of the experience that comes to those residing on the lower plane is avoided and escapes them. The law of compensation plays an important role in the lives of men and women. It will be noticed that one generally pays the price for anything they possess or lack. If one possesses one thing, they generally lack another. The balance is disturbed. No one can have their cake and eat it too. Everything has its pleasant and unpleasant sides. The things one gains are always paid for by the things one loses. The rich have much of what the poor lack, while the poor often have things that are out of reach for the rich. The millionaire may have the taste for feasting and the wealth to secure all the delicacies and luxuries of the table, yet lack the appetite to enjoy them. They envy the appetite and digestion of the laborer who lacks the wealth and inclinations of the millionaire, and who derives more pleasure from their simple food than the millionaire could, even if their appetite were not satiated or their digestion ruined. For needs, habits, and inclinations differ throughout life. The law of compensation is always in action, striving to balance and counterbalance, and always succeeding with time, even if it may take several lives for the pendulum swing of rhythm to return. Chapter 12. Causation. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Causality is nothing but a name for the unrecognized law. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law, The great sixth Hermetic principle, the principle of cause and effect, integrates the truth that law permeates the universe. Nothing happens by chance. Coincidence is simply a term that indicates an existing but unrecognized or perceived cause. Phenomena are continuous without interruption or exception. The principle of cause and effect underlies all scientific thought, ancient and modern, and has been stated by Hermetic instructors from the earliest days. Although many varied debates have arisen among the many schools of thought since then, these disputes have mainly focused on the details of the operations of the principle, and more often still on the meaning of certain words. The underlying principle of cause and effect has been accepted as correct by practically all worthy thinkers in the world. To think otherwise would be to deprive the phenomena of the universe of the sphere of law and order and relegate them to the control of something imaginary called coincidence. A brief reflection will show anyone that there is in reality no such thing as pure coincidence. Webster defines the word coincidence as follows: an agent or mode of activity assumed different from a force, law, or design, the operation or activity of such an agent, the supposed effect of such an agent, an accidental event, etc. But a brief reflection will show you that there can be no such agent as coincidence in the sense of something outside of law, something outside of cause and effect. How could there be something acting in the phenomenal universe independently of the laws, order, and continuity of the latter? Such an entity would be entirely independent of the regular order of the universe, and therefore superior to it. We can imagine nothing outside of all being outside of law, and that only because all is law itself. There is no place in the universe for something outside and independent of the law. The existence of such an entity would render all natural laws ineffective and plunge the universe into chaotic, lawless disorder. A careful examination will show that what we call coincidence is simply an expression that relates to obscure causes, causes that we cannot perceive, causes that we cannot understand. The word coincidence derives from a word meaning to fall, like the fall of dice, the idea being that the fall of the die and many. Other events are simply events unrelated to any cause, and it is in this sense that the term is generally used. But when the matter is closely examined, it is seen that there is no coincidence in the fall of the die. Every time a die falls and shows a certain number, it obeys a law as infallible as that which governs the revolution of planets around the sun. Behind the fall of the die, there are causes or chains of causes that go back further than the mind can follow them. The position of the die in the cup, the amount of muscular energy expended in the throw, the condition of the table, etc., are all causes whose effect can be observed. But behind these observed causes, there are invisible chains of previous causes, each affecting the number of the die that falls upwards. If one were to throw a die a large number of times, it would be found that the numbers displayed would be roughly equal, meaning there would be an equal number of 1.2 points, etc., falling upwards. Tossing a coin into the air may come up heads or tails, but by making a sufficient number of tosses, heads and tails will level out approximately. This is the operation of the law of averages, but both the average and the single toss fall under the law of cause and effect, and if we were able to examine the previous causes, it would be clear that it was simply impossible for the die to fall otherwise than it did under the same circumstances and at the same time, given the same causes. The same results will always follow the same causes. There is always a cause and a why for every event. Nothing ever happens without a cause, or rather a chain of causes. Some confusion has arisen in the minds of those who consider this principle from the fact that they were unable to explain how one thing could cause another thing, that is, be the creator of the second thing. In reality, nothing ever causes or creates another thing. Cause and effect simply deal with events. An event is what comes, happens, or occurs as a result or consequence of a previous event. No event creates another event, but is simply a preceding link in the great ordered chain of events that flow from the creative energy of the All. There is continuity between all previous, successive, and consequent events. There is a relationship between everything that has happened before and everything that follows. A stone breaks off from a mountain and crushes the roof of a hut in the valley below. At first glance, this is considered a chance occurrence, but upon closer examination, a great chain of causes is found behind it. Firstly, there was the rain that softened the earth supporting the stone and allowed it to fall. Then, behind that, there was the influence of the sun, other rains, etc., which gradually disintegrated the piece of rock from a larger piece. There were also the causes that led to the formation of the mountain and its disturbance by the convulsions of nature, and so on indefinitely. Thus, we could trace the causes behind the rain, etc., and then we could consider the existence of the roof. In short, we would find ourselves entangled in a network of cause and effect, from which we would soon seek to disentangle ourselves. Just as a man has 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on up to, let's say, 40 generations, the number of ancestors amounts to millions. Similarly, for the number of causes behind even the most trivial event or phenomenon, like the passage of a tiny speck of soot before your eyes. It is not a simple matter to trace the speck of soot back to the primitive period of the world's history, when it was part of a voluminous tree trunk that was later transformed into coal, and so on to the speck of soot that now passes before your sight, on its way to other adventures. And a powerful chain of events, causes and effects brought it to its current condition, and the latter is just one of the series of events that will lead to producing other events in hundreds of years. One of the series of events resulting from the tiny speck of soot was the writing of these lines, which prompted the typist to do certain work, the reader to do the same, and which will evoke certain thoughts in your mind and in that of others, and so on, indefinitely. All of this surpasses man's capacity to think further, and all of this from the passage of a tiny speck of soot, which shows the relativity and association of things, and the fact that there is no big or small in the mind. Let's reflect for a moment. If a certain man had not met a certain young girl during the obscure period of the Stone Age, you, those who are now reading these lines, would not be here now. And perhaps if the same couple had missed meeting, we, those who are now writing these lines, would not be here now. And the very act of writing on our part and the act of reading on yours will not only affect our respective lives, but will also have a direct or indirect effect on many other people living now and in times to come. Every thought we think, every act we perform, has direct or indirect results that fit into the great chain of cause and effect. In this work, we do not wish to enter into a consideration of free will or determinism for various reasons. The main one being that neither side of the controversy is entirely correct. In fact, both sides are partially correct. According to Hermetic teachings, the principle of polarity shows that both are half-truths. The opposite poles of truth teach that man can be free and yet be bound by necessity, depending on the meaning of the terms and the level of truth from which the question is examined. The ancient writers thus express the question: the further the creation is from the center, the more it is attached. The closer one gets to the center, the freer one is. Most people are more or less slaves to heredity, environment, etc., and manifest very little freedom. They are swept away by the opinions, customs, and thoughts of the outside world, as well as by their emotions, feelings, moods, etc. They manifest no mastery worthy of the name. They reply with indignation, "Well, I am certainly free to act and do as I please. I simply do what I want to do." But they cannot explain where this wanting and this pleasing come from, what prompts them to prefer doing one thing rather than another, what drives them to prefer this to that. There is no reason for their pleasure and will. The master can change these pleasures and beliefs into others, at the extreme opposite of the mental pole. They are capable of willing to will instead of simply willing, because a feeling, mood, emotion, or environmental suggestion prompts in them a tendency or desire to do so. Most people are dragged like the falling stone, obedient to the environment, external influences and internal moods, desires, etc., not to mention the desires and wills of other people stronger than them, heritage, environment, and suggestion that carry them without resistance on their part or exercise of will, moved like pawns on the chessboard of life, playing their roles and being set aside once the game is over. But the masters, knowing the rules of the game, rise above the plane of material life and, in contact with the higher powers of their nature, dominate their own moods, characters, qualities, and polarity, as well as the environment around them. They thus become players of the game rather than mere pawns, causes rather than effects. The masters do not escape the causation of the higher planes, but adapt to the higher laws and thus dominate the circumstances in the lower plane. They thus become a conscious part of the law, instead of being mere blind instruments, serving on the higher planes, ruling on the material plane. But in the higher as in the lower, the law is always in action. There is no such thing as chance. The blind goddess has been abolished by reason. We are now able to see with eyes enlightened by knowledge that everything is governed by universal law, that the infinite number of laws are only manifestations of the one great law, the law that is the all. It is certainly true that not a sparrow falls without being noticed by the mind of the all, that even the hairs on our head are counted, as the scriptures have said. There is nothing outside the law, nothing that happens contrary to it. And yet, do not make the mistake of supposing that man is only a blind automaton. Far from it. Hermetic teachings say that man can use the law to surpass the laws, and that the higher will always prevail over the lower, until in the end he seeks refuge in the law itself and mocks the phenomenal laws. Can you grasp the inner meaning of this? Chapter 13. Gender is present everywhere. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. The great seventh Hermetic principle, the principle of gender, integrates the truth that there is a gender manifested in everything, that the masculine and feminine principles are always present and active at all phases of phenomena, on every plane of life. At this stage, we believe it is appropriate to draw your attention to the fact that gender, in its Hermetic sense, and sex, in the ordinary and accepted use of the term, are not the same. The word gender derives from the Latin root meaning to beget, procreate, generate, produce. A brief reflection will show you that the word has a much broader and general sense than the term sex, referring to the latter to the physical distinctions between male and female living beings. Sex is simply a manifestation of gender on a certain plane of the great physical plan, the plan of organic life. We wish to emphasize this distinction for the reason that some authors who have acquired a superficial knowledge of Hermetic philosophy have sought to identify this seventh Hermetic principle with wild, fanciful, and often reprehensible theories and teachings regarding sex. The function of gender is simply that of creating, producing, generating, etc., and its manifestations are visible on all planes of phenomena. It is somewhat difficult to produce scientific evidence on this subject because science has not yet recognized this principle as universally applicable. However, despite this, some evidence emerges from scientific sources. Firstly, we find a clear manifestation of the principle of gender among the corpuscles, ions, or electrons that constitute the basis of matter as science knows it today, and which, by forming certain combinations, form the atom, which was considered until very recently as final and indivisible. The latest word from science is that the atom is composed of a multitude of corpuscles, electrons or ions, these different names being used by different authorities, swirling around each other and vibrating to a high degree of intensity. However, the accompanying statement is that the formation of the atom actually results from the accumulation of negative corpuscles around a positive one. Positive corpuscles seem to exert some influence on negative corpuscles, causing them to assume certain combinations and thus to create or generate an atom. This is in accordance with the oldest Hermetic teachings, which have always identified the masculine principle of gender with the positive pole and the feminine with the negative pole of so-called electricity. Now, a word about this identification. The public mind has formed a wholly erroneous impression concerning the qualities of the so-called negative pole of electrified or magnetized matter. The terms positive and negative are very improperly applied to this phenomenon by science. The word positive means something real and strong in comparison to a negativity or weakness. Nothing could be further from the actual facts of electrical phenomena. The so-called negative pole of the battery is actually the pole through which the generation or production of new forms and energies manifests. There is nothing negative about it. The best scientific authorities now use the term cathode instead of negative, the word cathode deriving from the Greek root, meaning descent, path of generation, etc. From the cathode pole, swarms of electrons or corpuscles emerge. From this same pole emerge those wonderful rays that have revolutionized scientific conceptions over the last decade. The cathode or negative pole is the mother principle of electrical phenomena and the subtlest forms of matter known so far by science. Thus you see that we are justified in refusing to use the term negative in our consideration of the subject, and in insisting on replacing the word feminine with the ancient term. The facts of the case confirm us in this, regardless of Hermetic teachings, and so we will use the term feminine instead of negative when speaking of this pole of activity. The latest scientific teachings assert that creative corpuscles or electrons are feminine. Science says they are composed of negative electricity. We say they are composed of feminine energy. A feminine corpuscle detaches, or rather releases a masculine corpuscle, and begins a new career. It actively seeks union with a masculine corpuscle, following a natural impulse to create new forms of matter or energy. One writer goes so far as to use the term search toward the abolition of a union, etc. This detachment and union form the basis of much of the activity of the chemical world. When the feminine corpuscle joins a masculine corpuscle, a certain process begins. The feminine particles vibrate rapidly under the influence of masculine energy and circulate rapidly around it. The result is the birth of a new atom. This new atom is actually composed of a union of masculine and feminine electrons or corpuscles. But when the atom's union is formed, it becomes a single separate thing having certain properties, but no longer manifesting the property of free electricity. The process of detachment or separation of feminine electrons is called ionization. These electrons or corpuscles are the most active workers in the realm of nature. From their unions or combinations, the various phenomena of light, heat, electricity, magnetism, attraction, repulsion, chemical affinity, and other similar phenomena manifest. All of this arises from the operation of the gender principle in the domain of energy. The part of the masculine principle seems to be to direct a certain inherent energy toward the feminine principle, thus initiating activity and creative processes. But the feminine principle is the one that always does the creative work. And this is true on all planes, yet each principle is incapable of operative energy without the assistance of the other. In some life forms, both principles are combined in one organism. Thus, everything in the organic world manifests both genders, the masculine in feminine form and the feminine in masculine form. Hermetic teachings include much about the operation of the two principles of gender in the production and manifestation of various forms of energy, etc. However, we do not deem it appropriate to go into details concerning these at this stage, as we are unable to support them with scientific evidence. Science has not yet reached that point. But the example we have given of the phenomena of electrons or corpuscles will show you that science is on the right track, and will also give you a general idea of the underlying principles. Some eminent scientific researchers have announced their belief that in the formation of crystals, something corresponds to sexual activity. This is another sign showing which way the scientific winds are blowing, and each year will bring further facts to confirm the validity of the Hermetic principle of gender. You will find that gender is in constant operation and manifestation, both in the domain of inorganic matter and in the domain of energy or force. Electricity is now generally considered as the element in which all other forms of energy seem to merge or dissolve. The electric theory of the universe is the latest scientific doctrine, and it is rapidly gaining popularity and general acceptance. As a result, if we are able to discover in the phenomena of electricity, even at the root and source of its manifestations, a clear and undeniable proof of the presence of gender and its activities, we are justified in believing that science has finally offered evidence of the existence in all universal phenomena of this great Hermetic principle. The principle of gender does not require you to take your time with well-known phenomena such as the attraction and repulsion of atoms, chemical affinity, the loves and hatreds of atomic particles, the attraction or cohesion between molecules of matter. These facts are too well known to require extensive commentary from us. But have you ever considered that all these things are manifestations of the principle of gender? Do you not see that the phenomena perfectly correspond to those of corpuscles or electrons? Furthermore, do you not see the relevance of Hermetic teachings affirming that the very law of gravitation, which exerts an attraction to which all particles and bodies of matter in the universe are subjected to one another, is nothing but another manifestation of the principle of gender operating in the direction of attracting masculine energies to feminine ones and vice versa? We cannot offer scientific proof of this at the moment, but examine the phenomena in the light of Hermetic teachings on the subject and see if you do not have a better working hypothesis than that offered by scientific physics. Subject all physical phenomena to this test, and you will always discern the principle of gender in evidence. Now let us turn to a consideration of the operation of the principle in the mental domain. Chapter 14. Mental Gender. To students of psychology who have followed the modern trend of thought along the lines of mental phenomena, the persistence of the idea of dual mind has attracted attention, an idea that has manifested so strongly over the past 10 or 15 years and has given rise to a number of plausible theories regarding the nature and constitution of these two minds. The late Thomson J. Hudson gained great popularity in 1893 by advancing his well-known theory of the objective and subjective minds. Arguing that there existed in each individual, other writers have attracted almost as much attention, with theories concerning conscious and subconscious minds, voluntary and involuntary minds, active and passive minds, etc. The theories of different authors differ from one another, but the underlying principle of the duality of mind persists. The student of Hermetic philosophy is tempted to smile when reading and hearing about these many new theories on the duality of mind, each school stubbornly clinging to its own fanciful theories and proclaiming to have discovered the truth. The student turns the pages of occult history and, going back far to the obscure beginnings of hidden teachings, finds references to the ancient Hermetic doctrine of the principle of gender in the mental domain. The manifestation of mental gender was known in ancient philosophy, and it was explained by the theory of mental gender. This idea of mental gender can be explained in a few words. For students familiar with the modern theories mentioned earlier, the masculine principle of the mind corresponds to what is called the objective mind, the conscious mind, the voluntary mind, the active mind, etc. And the feminine principle of the mind corresponds to what is called the subjective mind, the subconscious mind, the involuntary mind, the passive mind, etc. Hermetic teachings do not agree with the many modern theories regarding the nature of the two phases of the mind, nor do they recognize many of the alleged facts for the respective aspects, some of these theories and claims being pushed too far and incapable of withstanding the test of experience and demonstration. We address these phases only for the purpose of aiding the student in assimilating their previously acquired knowledge with the teachings of Hermetic philosophy. Students of Hudson will notice the assertion at the beginning of his second chapter of the law of psychic phenomena that the mystical jargon of Hermetic philosophers reveals the same general idea, the duality of mind. If Dr. Hudson had taken the time and effort to decipher some of the mystical jargon of Hermetic philosophy, he might have received much enlightenment on the subject of dual mind. But then perhaps his extremely interesting work would not have been written. Let us now consider the Hermetic teachings concerning mental gender. Hermetic instructors impart their teaching on this subject by inviting their students to examine the judgment of their conscience regarding their being. Students are encouraged to direct their attention inward, toward the being that dwells within each of them. Each student is led to see that their conscience first gives them a judgment about the existence of their being, the judgment being I am. These words seem to be initially the conclusion of conscience, but a closer and deeper examination reveals that this I am can be separated or fragmented into two distinct parts or aspects, which, although they work together and jointly, can nevertheless be separated in consciousness. While initially there appears to be only one existing being, closer and more thorough examination reveals the fact that there exists a me and an I. These mental twins differ in their characteristics and nature, and a study of their nature as well as the phenomena arising from them will shed much light on problems related to mental influence. Let us begin by considering the me, which is usually confused with the I by the student, until they push their research further into the recesses of consciousness. A man thinks of his being in its aspect of me as being composed of certain feelings, appetites, likes, dislikes, habits, attachments, particular characteristics, etc., all contributing to form his personality or the being known to himself and others. He knows that these emotions and feelings change, arise, and disappear, that they are subject to the principle of rhythm and the principle of polarity, leading him from one extreme of feeling to another. He also thinks of the me as being a certain knowledge gathered in his mind, and thus forming a part of himself. This is a man's self, but we have progressed too rapidly. For many men, this can be considered primarily as the consciousness of their body and physical appetites, etc., their awareness being mainly tied to their bodily nature. Some practically live therein. Some men even go so far as to consider their personal garments as part of their self, and indeed seem to regard them as part of themselves. A writer ironically remarked that men were made up of three parts: soul, body, and clothes. Those attached to their clothing lose their personality if stripped by savages in a shipwreck. But even many who are not so strongly attached to the idea of personal clothing are closely bound to the idea that their bodies are their self, unable to conceive of a being independent of the body, their mind seeming practically something belonging to their body, which is true in many cases. As man ascends in the scale of consciousness, he is able to disentangle his self from his idea of the body and to regard his body as belonging to the mental part of himself. But even then, he is very prone to wholly identify the self with the mental states, feelings, etc. he feels exist within him. He is very prone to consider these internal states as identical with himself, rather than simply things produced by a part of his mentality and existing in him, of him and through him, but not himself. He realizes that he can change these internal states of feelings by an effort of will and produce a feeling or state of nature exactly opposite in the same manner, and yet the same self exists. So, after a time, he is able to set aside these various vital states, emotions, feelings, habits, qualities, characteristics, and other personal mental belongings. He is able to set them aside in a collection of non-self curiosities and encumbrances, as well as precious possessions. This requires much mental concentration and power of mental analysis on the part of the student, but nevertheless the task is possible for the advanced student, and even those not so advanced can imagine how the process may be accomplished. After performing this process of setting aside, the student finds themselves consciously possessed of a being that can be considered in its dual aspects of I and me. They feel that in me there is something mental where thoughts, ideas, emotions, feelings, and other mental states can be produced. This may be considered the mental matrix, as the ancients called it, capable of generating mental offspring. Consciousness presents itself as a me with latent powers of mental creation and generation of offspring of all kinds and classes. Its powers of creative energy seem enormous, but it appears conscious that it must receive a form of energy from its companion I, or another I, before it can bring forth its mental creations. This consciousness brings the realization of a vast capacity for mental work and creativity, but the student quickly discovers that this is not all they find within their internal consciousness. They discover that there is something mental capable of willing to act through me along certain creative lines, and which is also capable of standing aside and observing mental creation. They are taught to call this part of themselves their I. They are able to rest in their consciousness at will. They do not find there a consciousness of capacity to actively generate and create in the sense of the gradual process accompanying mental operations, but rather a sense and consciousness of capacity to project energy from the I to the me, a process of willing mental creation to occur. They also discover that the I is able to stand aside and observe the mental creation and generation operations of the me. There is this dual aspect in the mind of every person. The I represents the masculine principle of mental gender. The me represents the feminine principle. The I represents the aspect of being, the me, the aspect of becoming. You will notice that the principle of correspondence operates on this plane, just as it does on the grand plane where universe creation takes place. Both are similar in nature, although fundamentally different in degrees. As above, so below, as below, so above. These aspects of the mind, the masculine and feminine principles of I and me, considered in relation to well-known mental and psychic phenomena, give the master key to those dimly known regions of mental operation and manifestation. The principle of mental gender offers the underlying truth to the whole realm of mental influence phenomena, etc. The tendency of the feminine principle is always in the direction of receiving impressions, while the tendency of the masculine principle is always in the direction of giving or expressing. The feminine principle has a much more varied field of operation than the masculine principle. The feminine principle guides the work of creating new thoughts, concepts, ideas, including the work of imagination. The masculine principle confines itself to the work of will in its various phases, and yet without the active aid of the will of the masculine principle, the feminine principle is liable to confine itself to generating mental images resulting from impressions received from outside, rather than producing original mental creations. Persons who can give continued thought and attention to a subject actively employ both mental principles, the feminine principle in active mental generation work, and the masculine will to stimulate and energize the creative portion of the mind. Most people truly use little of the masculine principle and content themselves with living in accordance with thoughts and ideas implanted within the me from the I of other minds. However, it is not our purpose to dwell upon this phase of the subject, which can be studied in any good textbook of psychology, with the key we have provided you concerning mental gender. The student of psychic phenomena realizes the wonderful phenomena classified under the headings of telepathy, thought transference, mental influence, suggestion, hypnotism, etc. Many have sought an explanation of these various phases of phenomena under the theories of the various teachers of dual mind, and to some extent they are right, for there is clearly a manifestation of two distinct phases of mental activity. But if these students will consider these dual minds in the light of Hermetic teachings concerning vibrations and mental gender, they will see that the long-sought key is at hand. In telepathic phenomena, we see how the vibratory energy of the masculine principle is projected towards the feminine principle of another person, and the latter captures the thought thus sent and allows it to mature. Similarly, suggestion and hypnotism work. The masculine principle of the person emitting the suggestions directs a wave of vibratory energy or a power of will towards the feminine principle of the other person, who accepts it as their own and acts and thinks accordingly. An idea thus implanted in the mind of another person grows and develops, and over time it is considered legitimate mental offspring, whereas in reality it is like the cuckoo's egg placed in the sparrow's nest, where it destroys the legitimate offspring and takes its place. The normal method is for the masculine and feminine principles in a person's mind to coordinate and harmoniously act in conjunction with each other. But unfortunately, the masculine principle in the ordinary person is too lazy to act. The deployment of the power of will is too light, and the consequence is that such people are almost entirely directed by the minds and wills of others, thinking and wanting for them. How few original thoughts or actions are executed by the ordinary person? Are they not mostly mere shadows or echoes of other people with stronger wills or minds than themselves? The problem is that the ordinary person resides almost entirely in their consciousness of the self and does not realize that they have a thing such as an I. They polarize themselves in their feminine principle of the mind and leave the masculine principle, where the will resides, inactive and unused. The strong men and women of the world invariably manifest the masculine principle of will, and their strength depends materially on this fact. Rather than living on the impressions made on their minds by others, they dominate their own minds by their will, obtaining the type of mental images desired, and likewise, they dominate the minds of others in the same manner. Look at strong individuals. How do they manage to implant their thoughts in the minds of the masses, sowing their thoughts like seeds and skillfully cultivating them to grow and develop in the minds of others? While strong individuals have thoughts in accordance with the desires and wills of others, this is why the masses are like sheep-like creatures, never having their own idea or using their own powers of mental activity. The manifestation of mental gender can be observed all around us in everyday life. Magnetic persons are those who can use the masculine principle to impress their ideas upon others. The actor who makes the audience cry or laugh according to his desires uses this principle, as does the successful speaker, statesman, preacher, writer, or anyone else in the limelight. The particular influence exercised by certain persons over others is due to the manifestation of mental gender along the vibratory lines mentioned above. In this principle lies the secret of personal magnetism, personal influence, fascination, etc., as well as phenomena generally grouped under the name of hypnotism. The student who has become familiar with phenomena, generally described as psychic, will have discovered the important role played in these phenomena by this force, which science has called suggestion. Intelligently understanding the various psychic phenomena in which suggestion underlies requires a correct understanding of suggestion, but even more essential is knowledge of vibrations and mental gender. For the student of suggestion, the entire principle of suggestion depends on the principle of mental gender and vibrations. It is customary in the writings and teaching of suggestion to explain that it is the objective or voluntary mind that exercises mental impression or suggestion on the subjective or involuntary mind, but they do not describe the process or give any analogy in nature for us to more easily understand the idea. However, if you want to think about the matter in the light of Hermetic teachings, you will be able to see that the activation of the feminine principle by the vibratory energy of the masculine principle is in accordance with the universal laws of nature, and that the natural world provides countless analogies by which the principle can be understood. In fact, Hermetic teachings show that even the creation of the universe follows the same law, and that in all creative manifestations on the spiritual, mental, and physical planes, this principle of gender is always in action. This manifestation of the masculine and feminine principles, as above, so below, and even more than that, once the principle of mental gender is grasped and understood, the various phenomena of psychology become capable of being classified and intelligently studied, instead of being largely in the dark. The principle works in practice because it is based on the immutable universal laws of life. We will not enter into a detailed discussion or description of the various phenomena of mental influence or psychic activity. There are many books, many of them quite good, that have been written and published on this subject in recent years. The main facts established in these various works are correct, although different authors have attempted to explain the phenomena by multiple and fanciful theories of their own. The student can familiarize themselves with these subjects, and by using the theory of mental gender, will be able to bring order to the chaos of conflicting theories and teachings, and even quickly become a master of the subject if inclined to do so. The purpose of this work is not to give a detailed account of psychic phenomena, but rather to provide the student with the master key that will enable them to open the many doors leading to the portals of the temple of knowledge they may wish to explore. We believe that by considering the teachings of the Kybalion, one can find an explanation that will serve to clarify many perplexing difficulties, a key that will open many doors. What interest is there in going into detail regarding the many aspects of psychic phenomena and mental science, assuming that we put into the hands of the student the means to become fully acquainted with any phase of the subject that may interest them? With the aid of the Kybalion, one can traverse any occult library, thus reviving the old light of Egypt, many dark pages and obscure subjects. Such is the purpose of this book. We do not come to expound a new philosophy, but rather to provide the outlines of an ancient teaching that will illumine the teachings of others, which will serve as a great reconciler between different theories and opposing doctrines. Chapter 15. Hermetic Axioms. Possession of knowledge, unless accompanied by a manifestation and explanation in action, is like the accumulation of precious metals, a vain and foolish thing. Knowledge, like wealth, is meant to be used. The law of use is universal, and he who violates it suffers because of his conflict with natural forces. Hermetic teachings, although they have always been safely kept in the minds of lucky holders for reasons we have already established, were never intended to be simply stored and kept secret. The law of use is considered in the teachings, as you can see from the above note from the Kybalion, which establishes it as a force. Knowledge without use and expression is a vain thing that benefits neither its holder nor the race. Be careful not to be mentally miserly and express in action what you have learned. Study the axioms and aphorisms, but also apply them. We present below some of the most important hermetic axioms from the Kybalion, with some added comments to each of them. Accept them and practice them, for they are truly yours only if you have used them to change your mood or mental state, changing your vibration. With the Kybalion, one can change their mental vibrations through an effort of will, deliberately directing attention towards a more desirable state. Will directs attention, and attention changes vibration. Cultivate the art of attention through will, and you will have solved the secret of mastering moods and mental states. To destroy an undesirable frequency of mental vibration, implement the principle of polarity and focus on the opposite pole to the one you wish to suppress, changing the undesirable by changing its polarity. The Kybalion. This hermetic formula is one of the most important, based on true scientific principles. We have shown you that a mental state and its opposite are only two poles of the same thing, and that through mental transmutation, polarity can be reversed. This principle is known to modern psychologists, who apply it to breaking unwanted habits by instructing their students to focus on the opposite quality. If you are plagued by fear, do not waste time trying to kill fear, but rather cultivate the quality of courage, and fear will disappear. Some writers have expressed this idea very strongly, using the illustration of the dark room. You do not have to sweep or drive away the darkness, but simply by opening the shutters and letting in the light, darkness is gone. To kill a negative quality, focus on the positive pole of that same quality, and vibrations will gradually change from negative to positive until you are finally polarized on the positive pole instead of the negative. The reverse is also true, as many have discovered to their dismay when they allowed themselves to vibrate too consistently at the negative pole of things. By changing your polarity, you can master your moods, change your mental states, reshape your disposition, and build your character. Much of the mental mastery of advanced hermetists is attributable to the application of polarity, one of the important aspects of mental transmutation. Remember the magnetic action previously mentioned, which says that the mind, just like metals and elements, can be transmuted from one state to another, from one degree to another, from one condition to another, from one pole to another, from one vibration to another. The Kybalion. Mastery of polarization is mastery of the fundamental principles of mental transmutation or mental alchemy, for unless one acquires the art of changing one's own polarity, one will be unable to influence one's environment. An understanding of this principle empowers one to change one's own polarity as well as that of others. If one is willing to devote the time, care, study, and practice necessary to master this art, the principle is true, but the results obtained depend on the patience and persistent practice of the student. Rhythm can be neutralized by applying the art of polarization, the Kybalion. As we explained in the previous chapters, Hermetists maintain that the principle of rhythm manifests on the mental plane as well as on the physical plane, and that the bewildering succession of moods, feelings, emotions, and other mental states is the result of the swinging back and forth of the mental pendulum, taking us from one extreme of feeling to the other. Hermetists also teach that the law of neutralization allows to a great extent to overcome the operation of rhythm in consciousness. As we explained, there is a higher plane of consciousness as well as the ordinary lower plane, and the master who mentally rises to the higher plane causes the oscillation of the mental pendulum on the lower plane to cease, and by receiving on his higher plane, he escapes the consciousness of the backward swing. This is done by polarizing in the higher self, and thereby raising the mental vibrations of the ego above those of the ordinary plane of consciousness, similar to rising above something and allowing it to pass below. The advanced hermetist polarizes at the positive pole of his being, the I am pole, rather than at the pole of personality, and by refusing and denying the operation of rhythm, he rises above his plane of consciousness, and by firmly affirming his being, he allows the pendulum to swing backward on the lower plane without changing its polarity. This is accomplished by all individuals who have attained a certain degree of self-mastery, whether they understand the law or not. These individuals simply refuse to be swung back and forth by the pendulum of mood and emotion, and by firmly asserting their superiority, they remain polarized on the positive pole. The master, of course, achieves a far greater degree of efficiency because he understands the law which is dominated by a higher law, and by using his will, he achieves a degree of mental stability almost unimaginable to those who allow themselves to be swung back and forth by the mental pendulum of moods and feelings. However, never forget that you do not really destroy the principle of rhythm, for it is indestructible. You simply counterbalance one law with another and thus maintain a balance. The laws of balance and counterbalance are in operation on the mental as well as physical planes, and an understanding of these laws enables the individual to seem to reverse laws while simply exercising a counterbalance. Nothing escapes the principle of cause and effect, but there are many planes of causation, and one can use the higher laws to transcend the lower laws, the Kybalion. Through an understanding and practice of polarization, Hermetists rise to a higher plane of causation and thereby counteract the laws of the lower planes of causation, rising above the plane of ordinary causes to become themselves a cause rather than merely being caused. They are able to master their own moods and feelings and neutralize rhythm. As we have already explained, they are able to escape much of the operation of cause and effect on the ordinary plane. The masses of people are carried along, obedient to their environment, to the wills and desires of others stronger than themselves, to the effects of inherited tendencies, to the suggestions of God around them, and to other external causes that tend to move them on the chessboard of life like mere pawns. By rising above these influential causes, advanced Hermetists seek a higher mental plane, and by mastering their moods, emotions, impulses, and feelings, they create for themselves new characters, qualities, and powers through which they surpass their ordinary environment and thus become virtually actors rather than mere pawns. These individuals help to play the game of life intelligently rather than being moved this way or that by stronger influences, powers, and wills. They use the principle of cause and effect instead of being used by it. Of course, even the highest are subject to the principle as it manifests on the higher planes, but on the planes of lower activity, they are masters rather than slaves. As the Kybalion says, the wise serve in the higher but rule in the lower. They obey the laws that come from above themselves, but on their own plane and on those below them, they govern and give orders. And yet, in so doing, they are part of the principle rather than opposed to it. The wise man adjusts to the law and, understanding its movements, implements it instead of being its blind slave. Just as the experienced swimmer goes in this direction or that at his pleasure, rather than being a log that is carried here and there, so is the wise man compared to the ordinary man. However, the swimmer and the log, the wise man and the fool, are subject to the law. He who understands this is well on the way to mastery, as the Kybalion says. In conclusion, let us again draw your attention to hermetic action. True hermetic transmutation is a mental art. According to the axiom above, Hermetists teach that the great work of influencing one's environment is accomplished by mental power. The fact that the universe is entirely mental implies that it can only be directed by mentality, and in this truth, one finds an explanation of all the phenomena and manifestations of the various mental powers that attract so much attention and study in these early years of the 20th century. Behind and beneath the teachings of the various cults and schools, the principle of the mental substance of the universe always remains constant. If the universe is mental in its substantial nature, then mental transmutation must therefore change the conditions and phenomena of the universe. If the universe is mental, then mind must be the highest power affecting its phenomena. If this is understood, then all so-called miracles and wonders are simply seen for what they are. Everything is mind. The universe is mental.